What if every time you looked at a patient, you saw a graveyard? Picture this: you're a medieval doctor, a supposed healer, wielding your rusted tools like a sorcerer brandishing spells, but instead of curing ailments, you're flirting with death itself. Your patients? They're not just sick. They're a ticking clock, a canvas of festering wounds, and you're the artist with blood-stained hands. In a world where the cure for a fever might be a concoction of leeches and snake oil, would you dare play God? What if the only prescription for a broken heart was a sharp blade? Shadows hover over dank, candle-lit chambers, where the stench of rot mingles with desperation. You're surrounded by whispers of the damned, the tortured wails of the afflicted echoing through the stone walls. Every heartbeat counts. Every wrong move could send a soul spiraling into the abyss. Think about it: the streets are lined with corpses. Witch hunts loom like storms, and you, innocently grasping a scalpel, could find yourself branded a heretic. A sneeze? A fever? A mere cough? You'd better have a plan, because in this era, it's not just the disease that kills, it's ignorance, and you could be its next victim. There's no medical school, no textbooks, just a handful of dubious scrolls written in a language only the most learned can decipher. Your mentors are drunken barbers and superstitious herbalists who teach you that bleeding a patient might just do the trick, or kill them outright. Bloodletting? You might as well hand them a knife and wish them luck. Why would anyone want to be a medieval doctor? Because the stakes are higher than a gallows for the guilty. You could be the one to turn the tide, to beat the odds, to make history. Or you could be the one who gets burned at the stake for too many miraculous failures. Picture the apothecary's shelf, jars filled with dried herbs, each labeled with ominous warnings. Poppy for pain, but too much? Sweet dreams turn into eternal slumber. Dandelions to cleanse the body, but what if the body fights back? Every potion is a gamble, a roll of the dice. Mix wrong, and you're not just a failure, you're a monster. And then there's the plague. It lurks like a predator, a shadow that stalks the innocent. You might think you're safe, hidden behind your robes, but the truth? You're one cough away from becoming a patient yourself. One fateful encounter, and you're not the one holding the scalpel. You think you could handle it? The pressure, the chaos, the constant dance with death? You're in a world where every choice is a razor's edge, where every breath is steeped in the pungent aroma of decay. You wouldn't just want to survive, you'd want to escape. Yet, here's the conundrum that gnaws at your soul: what if you're doomed to repeat the cycle? What if there's no escape at all? In the dim light of a flickering torch, the stench of sickness hung thick in the air, wrapping itself around us like a shroud. I stood there, heart pounding, alongside the disheveled figure of Brother Anselm. He was hunched over a shivering child, a mere ghost of a girl, her breath shallow and wheezing. "Please, just one more night," he whispered, his voice barely breaking through the cacophony of moans echoing from the thatched walls of the makeshift infirmary. I felt the desperation claw at my throat. Each plea, each shuddering breath, was a reminder of our powerlessness, a cruelty larger than ourselves. Brother Anselm was a man both revered and reviled. A healer, yes, but with hands that trembled, betraying the weight of lives lost and lives yet to save. He had once been a scholar, poring over dusty tomes in the scriptorium, hungry for the knowledge of Galen, Hippocrates, gods of medicine. Now, he was shackled by the realities of a world torn apart by plague, where ancient wisdom collided violently with the bespoken beliefs of divine retribution. "This is a test, a trial," they said. "God punishes the wicked." But here we were, wondering who among us deserved salvation. And then there was Eleonora, fierce and unyielding, clutching a bundle of herbs like a lifeline. Her eyes sparkled with defiance, each glance a challenge to the heavens. If only they could see that healing comes from the earth, not from the prayers of frightened men, she spat, her voice breaking through the fog of despair. She had witnessed too much, lost too many, her heart etched with scars deeper than any blade could carve. I remember the night we sat beneath the stars, her laughter like music, a balm for my weary soul. "The cosmos holds our fates," she had said. "But we control our remedies." Now, her remedies seemed like whispers lost in a storm. "Eleonora!" Brother Anselm barked, his voice a sudden thunderclap in the damp air. Your herbs can't fight this. They're dying, and we are powerless. The crack in his facade echoed in my chest. I felt the tremor of his doubt, the rift in his faith. It was a darkness I knew too well, the gnawing fear that life was slipping through our fingers like grains of sand, relentless and cruel. When I looked at him, I saw a reflection of my own fears, a desperation that clawed its way to the surface. Would we be remembered as saviors, or simply as mourners? The shadows danced around us, whispering secrets of ancient arts long forgotten. I recalled the cold, hard facts, bloodletting, leeches, the bizarre remedies that occupied our minds like specters. They bathed once a year, I joked nervously, attempting to lighten the weight of mortality pressing on my chest, so yeah, romance was earthy. But even my humor felt misplaced. Eleonora shot me a look, a mixture of pity and anger, and I shrank into my thoughts, the laughter dying like a candle flickering in the wind. The more I stood there, the more the air thickened with memories of the past, of proud physicians, once celebrated in marble halls, their knowledge now cast aside as the world spiraled deeper into darkness. The great libraries, once filled with scrolls that promised knowledge, now lay in disarray, their wisdom stifled by ignorance and fear. Memories of the ancients felt like ghosts haunting our every move, teasing us with their brilliance while we stumbled in the dark. Each moment, a cruel reminder that we were mere puppets in a play written by fate. Then came the wail of a mother, shattering our fragile resolve. My baby! Please! The cry spilled from her lips like boiling water, searing my heart. I felt a shift in the atmosphere, a palpable tension thick enough to cut with a knife. This was the moment, the threshold upon which we stood. Would we rise, or would we fall to our knees, begging for mercy? Brother Anselm gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white, eyes glistening like polished stone. I caught Eleonora's gaze, a silent understanding blooming between us like the herbs she clutched so tightly. In that heavy silence, time stretched infinitely, each heartbeat echoing like the ticking of a clock, counting down to an inevitable reckoning. I remembered my own mother's whispers, her hand soothing my fevered brow, her belief in a world beyond pain, beyond suffering. You're stronger than this, she'd say, and I could hear her voice now, a haunting melody woven into the fabric of my memory. But strength felt like a distant memory, it flickered like a dying flame within me, battling against despair. The child's breath hitched, and I felt the world tilt dangerously. Eleonora rushed forward, her hands trembling, and for a brief moment, the shadows receded, and it was just us against the tide of death that threatened to consume us whole. I remember, she whispered fiercely, the stories of those who fought back, who challenged the darkness. The urgency in her voice ignited something within me, an ember of hope that had long been stifled. We could not simply allow darkness to claim our hearts, we had to fight. I glanced at Brother Anselm, who stood frozen. The weight of knowledge and despair bore down on him, but it was there, in that fleeting moment, that I saw it, the flicker of resolve igniting behind those weary eyes. Perhaps we could forge a new path, bridging the ancient and the medieval, taking back the power that had been stripped from us. I took a step forward, my heart racing, the fear mingled with a strange, intoxicating sense of purpose. Together, I breathed, as if the very act of saying it could conjure the strength we needed. We can make them believe again. The shadows loomed, but in our hearts, something stirred, a whisper of hope that refused to be silenced, a promise that the origins of medicine were not merely bound to the past but were waiting for us to reclaim. The night stretched on, and we stood on the precipice, each heartbeat echoing with the rhythms of ancient healers, a cacophony of pain and resilience, longing to rise anew. A single candle flickered in the small room, the wax pooling like the regrets of 1,000 souls. The air was thick with the scent of herbs, bitter rue mixed with sweet chamomile, an olfactory duel that hinted at both healing and death. Outside, the wind howled, a mournful wail echoing through the cobblestone streets of the town, shrieking like a banshee calling forth its lost. The physician, Master Aldrich, stood hunched over a patient, a fevered child, her skin slick with sweat, eyes glassy, teetering on the edge of life and darkness. I remember, he whispered, reaching for her tiny, trembling hand. The warmth was fading, slipping through his fingers like sand. I remember when you laughed, when your smile lit up the grey of this world. His voice was a threadbare tapestry, each word stitched with desperation. The boy's mother hovered, a ghostly figure in the shadows, her face a mask of anguish, hope and despair warring behind her eyes. "Please, Master Aldrich. Do something." Her voice was a jagged blade, cutting deep into the fabric of his resolve. The weight of her gaze felt like chains around his heart. He could feel the pulse of her fear, a drumbeat of dread that quickened with each shallow breath from her child. But what could he do? He was but a man. The label of physician stitched onto his gown felt like a cruel joke. They claimed he possessed the knowledge of healing, but where was the scroll that spoke of miracles? Where was the magic that could turn the tide of suffering? His hands, steady yet trembling, were no more than flesh and bone. And in that moment, he was painfully aware of the silence around him, the stillness that permeated the air like a dark omen, heavy and suffocating. "I remember when you laughed," he repeated, desperate to summon the echoes of joy from the girl's past, as if they could wave a wand and banish the encroaching shadows that snaked their way into the room. The mother's sobs grew louder, a symphony of agony that resonated in his chest. As he poured bitter medicine down the girl's throat, the child's body lurched, her small frame trembling against the bed. Will she live? The question was a dagger, piercing the already fractured air. Aldrich's heart sank lower, deeper, into the abyss of uncertainty. And then, there was Elda, the apothecary, a woman of vast knowledge and fragile spirit, who had seen the fall of many, yet retained a fierce glimmer of hope. She stood just outside the door, her figure a silhouette against the creeping darkness, arms crossed, brow furrowed. "Aldrich," she called, her voice a soft caress, yet laced with urgency. "You cannot save them all. You know this." "It is not enough to simply know," he snapped, the desperation clawing at his throat. "You've seen what the plague has wrought. Its fingers stretch like a twisted hand across the land. How can I turn my back on this child, on this mother? I cannot be the harbinger of death." Elda stepped closer, her expression a complex mosaic of compassion and exasperation. "You are not a god. You are flesh, blood, and bone. You must learn to let go." Her words hung in the air, the weight of truth bending reality itself. He scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips, hollow and haunting. "Then why do we wear the mantle of healer? Why do we wield the ancient texts like swords if we cannot protect the innocent?" "Because," Elda said, her voice urgent now, "the world needs us to try." Try. The word echoed, a mantra drenched in sorrow. But it felt like a cruel jest, a promise made to a society that clung to the edge of despair, clambering for hope as they slipped slowly into the abyss. The child convulsed, small body racked with the fever that had turned her skin to fire. Aldrich's heart raced, each thump a drumbeat of dread. "Forgive me," he whispered, though he knew the words were empty, filled with the air of lost chances. "Forgive me for not being enough." In that silent exchange, time fractured. The breath of the cosmos seemed to hold still, waiting, watching, as if the universe itself was an unwilling spectator to this tragic play. Outside, the wind picked up again, shrieking like the tortured souls that haunted the streets, and in that moment, Aldrich felt the world tilt, the ground beneath him shifting like quicksand. "Your duty is to the living," Elda urged, her eyes burning with an intensity that could ignite fires. "We cannot dwell in the shadows of what we cannot change. The plague is a spectre, an unforgiving mistress. Master Aldrich, we must move forward. This child, she is not a reflection of your worth." Aldrich clenched his jaw, anguish twisting within him like barbed wire. He glanced down at the fragile creature before him, her breath now a whispered prayer to the heavens. "And if I choose to fight," he murmured. "If I choose to defy this dark fate, to wield my knowledge like a sword." "Then you must learn the difference between fight and flight," Elda replied softly, her voice a balm to his raging heart. "There is wisdom in surrender. Sometimes it is the hardest battle to let go." In that moment, the candle flickered again, casting eerie shadows that danced across the stone walls, a reminder of the fragility of life. Aldrich stumbled back, hand pressed against a cool stone, every heartbeat echoing in his ears. Memory flooded him, faces from the past, the laughter of children, the warmth of a summer day, the dread of every illness that had ever crossed his path. And beneath it all, the crushing weight of responsibility, a chain that bound him to a fate he couldn't escape. In that dim light, as despair hung heavy in the air, Aldrich felt the tremors of a decision building within him, a choice that would ripple through the very fabric of their existence. The sky outside darkened, clouds rolling in to swallow the stars, and he realized that the night was just beginning, an endless expanse of uncertainty, where hope flickered like the candle, fragile yet alive. As he turned back to face the child, the candle sputtered once more, the flame flickering violently, revealing the shadowy outline of the mother, her face a canvas of fear, love, and the heart-wrenching weight of helplessness. In that fleeting moment, Aldrich understood. He was not just a physician, he was a lighthouse in a storm, a flickering hope against the darkness that threatened to engulf them all. And the fight was not merely for survival, but for the very essence of humanity itself. And as the clock ticked on, the shadows deepened, and the wind howled outside, Aldrich braced himself for the battle ahead, knowing all too well that the true test of a healer lay not in the victories, but in the courage to face the darkness head-on. The room is thick with the stench of sweat and fear, the flickering candles casting grotesque shadows against the damp stone walls of the university. I remember the sound of the bell tolling at dawn, a herald of despair echoing through the streets of Paris. It had been a night punctuated by the agonizing cries of the sick, the lamentations of the desperate, and the silence of those left behind. Death loomed like a spectre over us all, and yet here I stood, a mere apprentice in my tattered robes, clutching a faded text, my heart racing, my hands trembling. "Master!" I shout into the chaos, my voice barely rising above the cacophony. "Let me help!" But the urgency in my words is swept away in the tide of misery that crashes against the stone walls. The master, a towering figure whose wisdom seemed as ancient as the stones themselves, glances at me. His eyes, pools of exhaustion, reflect the relentless burden of knowledge he carries. "Help," he scoffs, a bitter laugh escaping his cracked lips. "You have yet to learn that knowledge is not salvation, boy. It is a curse. You crave it, yet it will not save you from the darkness waiting to swallow us all." I remember how I wanted to scream, to tell him that knowledge was everything, that I would fight for it, against the shadows that danced in the corners of my mind. But there was no time for defiance, the sick were multiplying like weeds in the fields, and with each body that fell, my resolve strengthened, even as despair gnawed at my insides. Our education began in the halls of the university, where parchment and ink were our weapons. I was surrounded by brilliant minds, each with their own demons. There was Elise, the girl with fiery red hair and a spirit to match, who would argue vehemently against the teachings of Galen. "He speaks of humors, of bloodletting as a remedy, but what if it's the bleeding that kills?" she would insist, her voice ringing with a passion that ignited hope in the hearts of the weary. But then there was Thomas, the shadow that trailed Elise. Quiet, observant, haunted. He would watch her with eyes full of admiration, yet he was bound by the weight of tradition, shackled to the teachings of a distant past. "We cannot challenge the ancients, Elise. They are our foundation, our guide," he would whisper, the tremor in his voice betraying the conflict within him. I watched them both, two sides of a coin, each wrestling with the very fabric of their identities. I felt myself slipping between them, the observer, the unwilling participant in a game of intellect and emotion played against the backdrop of suffering. I remember the day the plague struck, a dark cloud drifting over the university like an omen. We were forced to confront our beliefs head-on, our theories colliding like storm clouds in a turbulent sky. The old text spoke of humors, blood, phlegm, bile, and black bile, imbalance causing illness. A chilling notion. What if the imbalance is us? I pondered aloud one evening, while the candlelight flickered like the final gasps of a dying man. What if we are the plague? Elise shot me a look that pierced through the haze of our fears. "You're mad," she laughed, but there was a tremor beneath her jest. "We are merely students, not the architects of fate." But what if we were? A chilling thought. What if we could rewrite the rules? As we immersed ourselves deeper into the study of anatomy, our apprenticeships became harrowing voyages through the human condition. The cadaver became an unsettling companion, its waxen skin a canvas on which we painted our theories, dissecting not just flesh but the very essence of mortality. I remember the stench of decay, the way it clung to the air like a noose, the sight of sinew and bone laid bare like the secrets of the universe begging to be understood. "Look here," my master commanded, his voice firm, holding the lifeless hand of our ghastly subject. "This is the vessel of a soul. Understand this, and you understand the very core of existence." But there was a dissonance, a haunting realization that knowledge could just as easily be a dagger as a balm. I could feel the tension building in the room as the master's words echoed within me. Each cut, each dissection felt like an assault, a reminder of my own frailty. With every sinew severed, I was unearthing not only the mysteries of life but the grim spectre of death that lingered at the edge of our understanding. Then came the day Thomas collapsed, clutching his head, eyes wide with terror. "I can't breathe." "It's in my blood," he cried, a scream of desperation that shattered the silence surrounding us. I rushed to him, my heart pounding like a war drum, pulling him from the depths of his despair. "It's not in your blood, it's in our minds," I shouted, recalling our countless debates, our passionate discussions about the nature of illness. But in those moments, when the spectre of death hovered near, reason faltered. The terror in his eyes was palpable, infectious, and I could feel the shadows closing in around us, a tangible darkness that whispered doubts into our ears. As I held Thomas, I could feel the weight of generations pressing down upon us. The scholars before us, the ancient texts, the ghostly whispers of those who had walked this path before. Knowledge is a double-edged sword, I remembered my master's ominous words. I had sought it, and now it felt like a curse, a burden that threatened to crush not just me, but all those I cared for. Despair was a living thing in that moment, as palpable as the cadaver that lay silent in the corner, reminding us of our inevitable fate. "What are we doing?" I whispered to Elise, my heart racing, my voice trembling. "We are chasing shadows, risking everything for knowledge that may lead us astray." She looked at me, her fierce spirit wavering, the laughter gone from her eyes. "But what else do we have?" Hope hung in the air, fragile yet tenacious, like a flickering candle in a howling storm. In that moment of uncertainty, I realized we were not just students of medicine, we were students of life and death, grappling with the very essence of our existence, bound together by our struggles, our fears, and our dreams. I remember the clock ticking, each second a reminder that time was slipping away, that knowledge was not the end, but merely the beginning of a far more complex journey. Outside, the world continued to spin, shadows danced, and the spectre of death loomed ever closer. But within these walls, beneath the weight of history and the echoes of laughter and despair, we stood together, on the precipice of something greater. And as the shadows whispered around us, I felt a surge of determination rise within me, a fierce desire to challenge the darkness, to turn our fear into a weapon against the inevitable. I remember the moment vividly, a spark igniting within the depths of my soul, the haunting realization that our quest for knowledge was not merely about learning, it was about survival, about the battle against the night that threatened to consume us all. A scream slices through the damp air of the dimly lit apothecary's chamber, a guttural wail that echoes from the very depths of despair, pulling at the heartstrings of anyone who dares to listen. The scent of crushed herbs and stale sweat clings to the walls like a shroud, casting shadows that dance in the flickering candlelight. I can hear the sharp clang of metal instruments, the desperate murmurs of the sick and the dying, and in that cacophony, the whispers of ancient wisdom creep in like a ghost, haunting the minds of those who seek to heal. In the corner, Agnes, a young healer with dirt under her fingernails and fire in her heart, kneels beside a fevered child, her hands trembling as she clutches a tattered scroll, a relic of the great Hippocrates, the father of medicine. "I remember," she gasps, her voice barely rising above the child's anguished cries, "the sacred text says that the body is a vessel, a temple of the soul. But the soul feels far from this wretched place, trapped in a torment that defies even the ancients' wisdom." Panic wells up inside Agnes, twisting like a coiled serpent. Can words written centuries ago save this child? Can they save her? Outside, the sun hangs low in the sky, a red orb bleeding into the horizon, casting a sinister glow over the medieval city. The streets are alive with the muted sounds of life, merchants hawking their wares, the distant clang of blacksmiths, the laughter of children. But beneath that facade lies a festering dread. The plague is returning. A spectre of death, cloaked in shadows, strides through the alleys, claiming its victims one by one. And then there's Elias, a scholar, and her mentor, his brow furrowed in despair beneath strands of wild hair that cling to his forehead like a curtain hiding his torment. He idolizes Galen, the great physician whose texts are as much a part of him as the air he breathes. Yet, buried beneath his reverence is a gnawing doubt. "I remember," he murmurs, pacing the creaky floorboards. "Galen wrote of humors and balance, but what if the balance is just a lie?" His heart races with the fever of truth, but the world around him, the world of authority, of ancient wisdom, pulls him back in, wrapping him in chains forged of doubt and misgivings. Agnes looks up at him, her eyes wide with desperation, as if seeking reassurance in his turmoil. "Elias, tell me, do you really believe in these texts? Can they save him?" A pause hangs in the air, heavy like the fog that rolls in from the river. Elias swallows hard, memories of his own childhood rush past him, tainted with loss. "I once believed, Agnes, that knowledge was a beacon," he finally says, his words a brittle whisper. "But now, I fear it's merely a reflection of our own ignorance." The scroll trembles in her hand, a fragile lifeline to a past that offers no solutions. The ancient words, filled with the power of early medicine, now weigh down like lead. She can hear them speaking beneath the surface, reassurance mixed with haunting uncertainty. "For humors," she breathes, recalling the ancient texts, "blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, but what of the heart? The soul?" For a moment, the air feels electric, as if the very cosmos is holding its breath, waiting for the clash of hope and despair. And then it crashes down. The child's breath comes in shuddering gasps, each one a reminder of mortality's brutal grip. Agnes feels that tightness in her throat, the terrible weight of the universe pressing down on her, a scream caught in her chest. The scroll slips from her fingers, fluttering to the ground like a fallen leaf. In that instant, the darkness encroaches, shadows spiraling around them, pressing in until the light feels like a distant memory. What if Galen is wrong, she suddenly cries, raw and unfiltered. What if all this knowledge is nothing but a false idol? We are killing the very souls we aim to save. Elias flinches, her words piercing through the layers of doubt he had so meticulously built, and for a moment, he sees the ghosts that linger in the edges of his thoughts, those lost to the whims of fate, those who fell prey to the ancient texts that promised salvation but delivered none. A chill runs down his spine. "No, Agnes," he replies, voice trembling. "Knowledge is power, but it's a sword that cuts both ways. It can save or condemn." And there it is, the heart of their conflict laid bare, an agonizing truth that they cannot ignore. The weight of centuries of wisdom bears down upon them, yet it feels hauntingly inadequate. The room seems to close in, every inhalation heavy with despair, charging the air with a static electricity that crackles at the edges of their consciousness. The child's breath falters, the moment stretches, and time itself hangs in the balance. Agnes reaches out, fingers brushing against the fevered skin of the child, her palm warm, her heart pounding like a war drum. "I remember," she whispers, "the stories of healing, of compassion, of the human spirit." In that fleeting moment, the very essence of humanity, the unyielding spirit of lives intertwined, surfaces. Their struggles, their hopes, their failures, laid bare like open wounds in the moonlight. The shadows deepen, but so does their resolve. What if we write our own text? Elias breathes, the words rolling off his tongue like a prayer, filled with desperation and possibility. What if we carve our own path? Agnes meets his gaze, her heart pounding, a spark igniting in the dark. But what if that path is strewn with our own fears? The candle flickers, casting long shadows that dance wildly around them, and amidst the chaos, the ancient texts whisper on, their legacy a haunting melody that neither can escape. They stand on the precipice of something terrifying and beautiful, a confrontation with the very essence of what it means to heal, to hope, to live. In that chamber, the echoes of Galen and Hippocrates resonate, binding them to a tradition both revered and reviled, and as the weight of their words hangs heavy in the air, they know, deep down in their bones, that they are no longer just bearers of history. They are the architects of a new narrative, one that will rise from the ashes of uncertainty. The struggle is far from over, it has only just begun. Thunder cracked overhead, a violent flash illuminating the night sky in a white-hot burst. In the distance, a figure stumbled, arms outstretched as if trying to ward off an unseen force. I stood frozen, a desperate witness to the chaos unraveling before me. It was as if the world held its breath, waiting for a sign, a signal from the heavens. The air crackled with anticipation, mingling with the scent of rain-soaked earth, a pungent reminder that something primal was afoot. I remember the first time I felt it, the surge of raw energy coursing through my veins, igniting the air around me. It was that night, under the oppressive weight of the storm, that I met Lena. Her eyes were pools of dark uncertainty, flickering like candle flames in the wind. She was a skeptic, a woman of science, yet here she was, caught in the throes of something she couldn't explain. "It's just a storm," she insisted, her voice rising above the howling winds, but I could see the doubt shadowing her features. And then there was Thomas, my brother, my anchor. He stood beside Lena, a weary figure with a heart heavy with grief, his gaze unwavering, fixed on the swirling clouds above. "God is testing us," he whispered, his faith a fragile thread fraying with every passing moment. I could see the turmoil gnawing at him, the fear that the divine was indifferent to our suffering. The weight of his belief settled like a stone in my chest. Did he truly think we were being watched, judged even? I wanted to shake him, to pull him back from that precipice of despair. As the storm intensified, I felt the rattle of fate in the air. The three of us, caught between the supernatural and the tangible, lingering in that uncomfortable liminality where faith and doubt danced like shadows in the dark. I could feel the atmosphere thickening, charged with whispers of divine intervention, the kind that made you question everything you thought you knew. I remember the stories Lena told, her voice a lifeline in our stormy reality. "Astrology is just a map," she said, her hands gesturing wildly, a reflection of our choices, not the cause of our suffering. But her words felt hollow, echoing in the recesses of my mind. I wanted to believe there was a reason behind the chaos, a cosmic design that could save us. But how could I reconcile that with the heartbreaking reality staring us in the face? Lightning split the sky again, and in that stark moment, I saw it, a shadow flitting across the ground, a spectre of something unseen. My heart raced, a visceral response to the unknown. "Did you see that?" I gasped, but even as I spoke, I questioned my own senses. Was it merely a trick of the light, or was it the manifestation of something dark lurking just beyond our comprehension? Lena's skepticism faltered for a heartbeat. "Maybe we're not alone," she whispered, her breath hitching as she glanced around, her bravado crumbling. The air was thick with unspoken fears, every heartbeat echoing with the dread of the unknown. But it was Thomas who took the plunge, lifting his chin defiantly. "Divine beings walk among us," he proclaimed, his voice rising above the storm's fury. "We mustn't lose hope." Yet hope was a fragile thing, one that slipped through fingers like sand. I wanted to scream, to claw my way back to reason, but the storm raged on, mocking our struggle. Each rumble of thunder felt like the universe's laughter, a reminder of its apathy. "Why are you doing this?" I pleaded, turning to Thomas. "Why cling to something that could shatter us?" His eyes held a mixture of pain and determination. "Because if we don't believe in something greater, what's left?" he replied, his voice cracking, vulnerability spilling into the storm. I remember the moment it all shifted, the sky roared, and the earth trembled. A blinding light surged, and in that heartbeat, reality blurred. The world became a tapestry of chaos, threads of fate intertwining in ways I couldn't grasp. I felt the weight of 1,000 unvoiced prayers pressing against my chest, the hopes of countless souls longing for answers. And in that moment, I understood, we were all desperately searching for meaning, for a sign that we were not alone, that the universe cared. But the universe remained silent, a vast emptiness that swallowed our cries. Lena's laughter rang hollow as the storm unveiled her deepest fears. What if all her science, her logic, was nothing but a fleeting illusion? What if the stars whispered secrets we couldn't decode? She looked at me, eyes wide with terror. "What if we're being punished?" she whispered, her voice trembling. No words could encapsulate the raw intensity of that moment. The storm was both outside and within us, a tempest of emotion spiraling into the void. I could feel my heart pounding, each beat a reminder of our fragile existence, of the thin line we walked between reality and the supernatural. I wanted to believe we could fight against the whims of fate, that we could wrestle with the divine and come out unscathed. As the last vestiges of light flickered and dimmed, I grasped their hands tightly, the warmth that tethered to sanity amidst the chaos. Whatever happens, we face it together, I promised, but even as I spoke, doubt crept in. It was the uncertainty that haunted my dreams, that painted my world in shades of despair. The storm continued to howl, a guardian of secrets, but something shifted in the air, a silent understanding that we were more than mere mortals adrift in a cosmic sea. We were players in a grand design, caught between our desires and the unfathomable depths of the divine. And in that moment, as the storm raged on, we stood on the precipice, heartbeats synchronized with the pulse of the universe, waiting for the next sign, the next whisper from the shadows. Time stretched, the night enveloping us in its dark embrace. The storm was relentless, but so were we, three souls intertwined in a struggle against the supernatural, desperately seeking meaning in a world painted in shades of uncertainty. What lay ahead was unknown, but there was solace in the shared journey, in the raw vulnerability of our plight. As we braced ourselves for the storm's climax, one thing became clear: the divine was as much a part of us as the darkness outside, and the confrontation was inevitable. In the dim glow of flickering candles, a figure huddled near the hearth, the room thick with an acrid stench. Smoke coiled around the air like an insidious serpent, wrapping itself around the edges of sanity. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest as she cradled her brother Matthew's limp form, his skin paling to the color of death itself. The shadows danced upon the walls, muttering secrets no living soul should hear. "I remember," she whispered, her voice breaking through the silence, "the laughter, the warmth of summer mornings, the way he used to chase fireflies." But laughter felt like a ghost now, haunting the corners of her mind. The doctor, a gaunt man with hollow cheeks and eyes that spoke of too many midnight vigils, leaned over Matthew, his breath ragged. "He has too much blood," he proclaimed, as if the very essence of life coursing through Matthew's veins was a curse. Eliza's breath hitched in her throat. The four humors, theory or madness? Blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, how could a recipe of human essence concoct such misery? This was their salvation, yet here they stood at the brink of horror, clutching at straws of superstition. "Bleed him," then, she spat, desperation clawing at her insides, stirring the remnants of hope. The doctor nodded, and steel glinted in the candlelight, a blade once used for surgery now turned to an instrument of potential salvation or doom. "We must restore balance," he murmured, but in that moment, all she could feel was the weight of dread pressing down like the very stones of the earth. I remember the stories of the wise men who trod ancient paths, seeking knowledge in the dark recesses of the mind. They spoke of humors like they were the very fabric of the universe. Too much of one, too little of another, they'd philosophize, their voices echoing against the stone walls of history. But here, in the heart of desperation, those words felt like a cruel jest, an absurd charade performed under the guise of healing. Matthew's body twitched as the doctor's blade kissed his skin, the blood pooling and breaking free as if it longed for escape. What if it doesn't work? The question, heavy and ominous, hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Eliza's fingers trembled against his clammy skin, her heart racing between fear and the flickering flame of hope. "You'll be all right, you'll see," she murmured to him, though every ounce of her being screamed that she was merely trying to convince herself. Outside, the night thickened, a blanket of darkness smothering the cries of the dying world. The city slept, ignorant of the turmoil within this room, unaware of the tragedy unfolding. It was a cruel joke that the heavens watched in silence, as if the stars themselves had turned their backs on this fragile moment. The village had sung hymns of health and prosperity, yet here they were, lost in a labyrinth of misguided remedies, a facade of healing that reeked of desperation and decay. I remember the tales of humorists and jesters, who filled taverns with laughter while the spectre of death loomed ever closer. "A good laugh is better than a stew," they'd quip, but here laughter felt like a distant memory, a painful echo in a room thick with silence. What's so funny about bleeding a man to life? Eliza thought, her mind racing, battling the absurdity of it all. The doctor's hands moved deftly, yet every cut felt like a sin against nature, a perversion of the delicate balance they all so desperately sought. "Yellow bile," he muttered, "it sours the spirit. We must purge." The words felt like a dagger, slicing through her already fraying nerves. Eliza's spirit writhed, entangled in the web of fear and helplessness. But what if it's not the bile? What if it's the heart? She cried, a raw edge creeping into her voice. Matthew's eyes fluttered, a flicker of life in the vastness of his pale face. "Sister," he whispered, and that sound, the tremor of hope, was enough to send her spiraling. She grasped his hand, the warmth of his skin a stark contrast to the freezing grip of despair. "I'm here, I'm right here," she promised, but inside, something shattered. The weight of their family's history pressed down upon her, of unyielding expectations, of burdens too heavy to bear. "Just a bit more," the doctor urged, as if he was trying to breathe life into a corpse. But every drop of blood that trickled away felt like a betrayal, a piece of Matthew's essence slipping through their fingers. She ached to scream, to tear down the walls of this room, to burn the charade of her moral theory to the ground. How could they think this would heal him, she thought, the absurdity of it all crashing down like a storm over the sea. What were they even doing? The shadows crept closer, whispering secrets that made her skin crawl. The flickering flames cast ominous shapes, as if mocking her resolve. The four humors, so revered, so trusted, they had turned into a snare, a trap set by minds too eager to believe in a balance that had long since vanished. "I remember the laughter," she whispered, the words dripping with grief. "I remember the fireflies." But the laughter was fading, swallowing itself in the throes of despair. The doctor continued, his focus sharp, yet she could see the tremor in his hands. What if he too was haunted by the knowledge that this was all a ruse? That all the bloodletting in the world couldn't mend a broken heart? The clock ticked, each second an echo of inevitability. In that moment, time lost its meaning. The past swirled around them, a moment of joy mingled with the bitter truth of their situation. Eliza's breath became ragged, the weight of helplessness crushing her spirit. What if the only remedy was love? What if healing demanded a different kind of sacrifice? The thought was a flicker of fire in her mind, yet the doctor's blade continued to slice through flesh, and the echoes of their laughter faded like whispers in a ghostly night. Then, a gasp, a sound so raw and painful it reverberated through the walls. Matthew's chest rose, a frail breath that seemed to suspend time. Hope flickered, a candle in the storm. But then, darkness threatened to envelop them. The shadows grew longer, creeping ever closer, and Eliza knew they were at the precipice. The four humors danced mockingly, their significance a cruel irony in the face of such desperation. Balance, she thought, clutching Matthew's hand, a lifeline in the tempest. We must create balance. But in that moment, she understood, balance could not be found in blood or bile, but in the chaos of love, in the raw, unfiltered desperation of a sister willing to lay down everything for her brother. "Let it be love," she whispered, her heart pounding against the weight of the world. And as the echoes of laughter faded into the shadows, she resolved to fight for his life, not through the cruel doctrines of the past, but in the fierce embrace of hope. A dance of shadows, whispers of the past haunting her footsteps, the doctor's hands trembling with uncertainty, the confrontation was at hand, and whatever came next, the humors would not claim them without a fight. The blade glinted in the flickering candlelight, a predator poised for its prey. I stood frozen, heart pounding against my ribs like a desperate creature begging for escape. The air thickened with the scent of sweat and iron, my own, mingling with the sterile chill that hung around the operating table, a cold, unwelcoming slab where life and death danced their macabre waltz. I can still hear the whispers, the anxious murmurs that skittered through the dimly lit chamber like restless phantoms, alive with an anticipation that gnawed at the edges of sanity. I remember the moment Clara was brought in, pale and trembling, her own fear palpable. She had been my friend, a warmth in the chill of this grim era, but now she lay before me, her life teetering on the edge of a knife. "I can't do it," she murmured, the words barely more than a ghost escaping her lips. My fingers twitched, longing to reach out, but the distance between us was no longer measured in space. It stretched across a chasm of dread and unspoken truths. I wanted to promise her safety, but safety was an illusion here. "Just breathe, Clara," I said, though my voice shook with the weight of my own terror. I watched as the surgeon, a man clad in a stained apron, his hand steady but his eyes haunted, prepared for what would become an act of desperation. The first incision would shatter her world, and I would be powerless to stop it. Each heartbeat echoed in my ears, a relentless drum roll heralding the beginning of this brutal symphony. They had no anesthesia. A cruel joke in a world so advanced yet so backward, where pain was a currency spent freely, and mercy was but a flicker in the darkness. I remember the first time I witnessed a surgery, the screams, the raw, unfiltered agony that clawed at my soul. They bathe once a year, I had joked nervously to a friend, so yeah, romance was earthy. It was a crude humor, a shield against the horror of reality. But standing here with Clara, the absurdity of it all felt as far away as the stars. The surgeon approached, a shadow of authority cloaked in blood-stained rags, and I felt the room suffocate under the weight of dread. I wanted to scream, to pull her from that table, to run far away from this place where flesh was torn with reckless abandon and hope was nothing but a flickering candle drowning in a storm. But my feet remained rooted, entangled in the fear that gripped us all. "Trust me," he said, his voice steady, but the tremor betrayed him, an echo of the torment he would inflict. Clara turned wide eyes on me, a plea woven into her gaze. I saw the flicker of doubt, the desperate search for reassurance. I offered a weak smile, one that felt more like a grimace. "You'll be fine," I lied, the words tasting like ash on my tongue. The first cut was swift, a cruel slice that opened her skin like a book eager to spill its secrets. Clara gasped, the sound a ghostly wail that reverberated through the chamber, shaking the very foundations of my resolve. I felt her agony rip through me, a visceral pain that rendered me helpless. "Stay with me, Clara," I whispered, but the words were swallowed whole by the chaos that erupted around us. Blood pooled, dark and glistening, a stark reminder of mortality laid bare. The surgeon worked with an intensity that bordered on madness, each movement calculated yet frantic, as if the hands of time were slipping away. "It's just a little more," he grunted, and I could see the strain etching lines of desperation into his brow. "Just a little more, and you'll be whole again." But there was no such thing as whole in this world, only fragments, jagged and bleeding, much like the bodies that occupied this cursed space. I remember the smell of iron seeping into the air, mingling with the faint scent of vile herbs, concocted to mask the stench of suffering. It was a wretched perfume, a reminder that life was a brittle flower growing through cracks in the pavement, fighting against the odds. Clara writhed, her body convulsing as the surgeon probed deeper, and I felt something inside me fracture, a splintering of the heart as I realized that the line between healer and executioner was nothing more than a smudge. I could see the shadows creeping in, the ghosts of those who had come before her, whispering their tales of despair and death, their stories woven into the very fabric of this decrepit room. "Please," she gasped, her voice breaking, "make it stop." I screamed silently, my heart clenching at her pain. I wanted to tear the air apart, to scream until the walls crumbled down, to rip Clara from that table and run far away from the horrors of a world that had turned its back on compassion. But the surgeon pressed on, a relentless force of nature, and I felt my grip on sanity slip away, as if I were standing on the precipice of a great abyss. Time twisted into a cruel mockery of itself, the minutes stretching and contracting like a breath caught in a throat. I watched as she slipped away, the life in her eyes dimming, flickering like the candlelight that cast long shadows, waltzing across the walls as if mocking our plight. I remembered nights spent dreaming of freedom, of a world where pain was not a constant companion, where laughter replaced the cries of despair. But that world was not here. This was a place where hope drowned in the waters of agony. And then, in a final gasp, Clara's voice broke free one last time. "I love you," she whispered, and the weight of those words sank deep into my chest, anchoring me to the moment, to the unbearable truth of our reality. The surgeon, oblivious to the emotional tempest raging around him, continued his merciless task, driven by something darker than mere duty. I felt the raw power of her love clawing its way through the darkness, a desperate plea for life as the shadows loomed ever closer. A heartbeat passed, a single staccato thump against the silence that enveloped us, the promise of life hanging by a thread. I knew that in this place, surgeries were not merely operations, they were confrontations with fate, a gamble with existence itself. The stakes were too high, the risks too great. And yet, the surgeon pressed onward, lost in a world of his own making, the dance of life and death swirling around him like ghosts in the night. I watched as the blood continued to flow, a crimson tide surging through the chaos, and I felt a piece of myself slip away with each drop. Clara's love, her spirit, her laughter, everything we had built together was unraveling before my eyes in a grotesque theater of pain. I longed to tell her it would be all right, that the light would return, but the truth was a bitter poison lodged in my throat. And then, just as the world seemed poised to collapse around us, a strange stillness enveloped the room, a pause in the chaos, a moment suspended in time. Clara's eyes fluttered closed, her breath a whisper against the cacophony of agony. The darkness drew near, and I could feel it creeping over me, threatening to swallow us whole, to drag us into the abyss where stories ended and hope was nothing but a distant memory. In that moment, as the surgeon continued his work, oblivious to the heartache rolling through the chamber, I realized that surgery was more than a physical act. It was a dance with danger, a ballet of blood and tears, where the line between life and death blurred into insignificance. There was no safety net here, no soft landing, only the grim reality of choices made in the name of survival, choices that carried with them the weight of existence itself. The clock ticked away, each second a reminder of our fragility, of the haunting truth that lay just beyond the veil. I remember Clara's face, the way it looked as the dark crept in, the way she fought to stay afloat even as the surgeon wielded his blade with a cruel precision. I remember her love, a light that flickered against the overwhelming darkness, a beacon in the deep. And as I stood there, heart racing, breath quickening, I knew that this moment would etch itself into my very being, a haunting melody that would linger long after the echoes of the operating room faded into silence. The dance continued, the surgeon relentless in his pursuit, and I stood helpless, caught in the throes of anguish, a witness to the raw, unfiltered truth of our existence. The air was thick with desperation, a heavy fog of sickness and fear clinging to the walls of the dimly lit chamber. It hung there like a ghost, a spectre of unseen ailments creeping through the cracks, whispering their wicked secrets. I could hear her cough, deep, wet, rattling. It clawed at my insides, reverberating like the tolling of a death knell. Agnes, my sister, had been a flame of laughter and mischief just days before, but now she lay upon a filthy straw mattress, eyes glazed, skin pale as parchment. I pressed a trembling hand to her brow, too hot, too wet. The plague had come for her, a thief in the night, and I was powerless to stop it. "Will I die?" she croaked, voice barely a whisper, each word a fragile bird taking flight into the abyss. She looked at me, her gaze a mixture of terror and trust, and I felt the weight of her fear settle upon my chest like a stone. I wanted to lie, to weave a comforting tale of recovery and sunshine, but truth roared within me, binding my tongue. Instead, I turned towards Brother Marcus, a man whose very presence felt like a pendulum swinging between science and superstition. He entered, cloaked in a haze of crushed herbs and desperation. His hands were stained with the remnants of his bizarre concoctions, a macabre alchemist shrouded in shadows. "Fear not, young one," he said, voice low and soothing like the croon of a midnight lullaby. "I have remedies that will banish this illness, the blood of a live chicken, freshly drawn, and a draught of rosemary and honey to ease the cough." "It has worked before." I wanted to scream, to unleash the swirling tempest of disbelief and wretchedness clawing at my throat. A chicken? The feathery, clucking creature that was as likely to carry the pestilence as to cure it? But I held my tongue, for Brother Marcus was all we had, a flickering candle in a darkened room. As he handled the bird, the chicken flailed, its cries a desperate symphony of panic. Blood pooled in a small wooden bowl, an offering to the gods of healing. I stood frozen, a voyeur of this grotesque ritual, my heart pounding like a war drum against my ribs. A part of me wanted to flee, to tear myself from this wretched scene, while the other part fought against the hopelessness wrapping around me like a snake. "Do it, Agnes," I urged her, my voice trembling. "You must drink it." She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Do you trust me?" I pressed, and in that moment, every heartbeat echoed the silence between us. She nodded, a small, heart-wrenching movement, and I felt the air crackle with the weight of the decision. Would it be the salve or the poison? She took the elixir, its taste vile upon her tongue. I could see her struggling, the revulsion twisting her pale features, yet she swallowed it down. It was a prayer wrapped in desperation, a gamble with fate. Outside, shadows danced under the moonlight, the world oblivious to our plight. In the streets, others suffered, men and women collapsing under the weight of their ailments. The smell of decay hung heavy in the air, a sharp reminder of mortality. The townsfolk spoke of the bad air, of miasmas that seeped through the cobblestones, but they did little more than blame the winds. They too were awaiting remedies, bloodletting, leeches, the bizarre charms of the herbalists. Each ailment brought forth a new concoction, a cocktail of the grotesque and the absurd, powdered dragon's blood for fevers, the ear of a mole for the pox, and the ashes of burnt hair for the dry cough. I remember the last festival, the colors, the laughter, a stark contrast to this harrowing reality. Now, each memory felt like a betrayal, a slice through the tender flesh of nostalgia. I watched Brother Marcus prepare another potion, this one involving crushed gemstones mixed with vinegar. "It will draw out the sickness," he assured us. I glanced at Agnes, her eyes now half closed, each blink heavier than the last. "Will it help?" I whispered, though I could hardly hear my own voice over the cacophony of anguish outside. He looked at me, his eyes dark pools of uncertainty. "It is what we have," he replied, and in his tone, I recognized the truth, the fragility of hope. It was a steep cliff, and we were teetering on the edge, the abyss yawning below. As the night wore on, time became a suffocating blanket, each minute stretching into eternity. I was caught in a web of fear and love, the kind that binds siblings, unbreakable yet painfully taut. I recalled our childhood escapades, the nights spent under starlit skies, the dreams we spun together. Now, all that remained was a spectral shadow of what was once vibrant life. Suddenly, a loud knock shattered the silence, the door rattling on its hinges. Panic surged through me. What if it was the plague itself, come to claim more souls? I pushed the door open, revealing a gaunt figure, a neighbor with hollow eyes and a heart heavy with sorrow. "I've come for the doctor," he rasped. "My wife, she's taken ill." The urgency clawed at my insides, but I felt the weight of Agnes's frail form behind me, a tether to the present. "He's here," I said, my voice trembling. "But what can he do? What can any of us do?" The words hung like smoke in the air, heavy with despair. The figure's gaze flickered to Agnes, and I saw the flicker of understanding pass between us. We were all trapped in this wretched web, the sickness was a malevolent force, and we were mere pawns. The night deepened, shadows swallowed the light, and I realized the true horror. This was not just an illness, it was a reckoning. And as I turned back to Agnes, the darkness whispered promises of despair and fleeting hope, coiling around us like the very air we breathed. In that moment, I knew I had a choice, to succumb to the fear or fight against the encroaching shadows. The battle raged within me, thundering like a storm, as the clock ticked forward, relentless, unyielding, counting down to an uncertain fate. The room felt alive with tension, a living entity that pulsed with every breath we took. And I was caught in its grip, a witness to the haunting dance of life and death, the grotesque spectacle of medieval medicine where hope flickered like a candle in a gale, and the line between healing and harm was as thin as a whisper. The candle flickers, shadows dance like tortured souls on the stone walls. A scream pierces the stale air, raw and desperate, echoing through the narrow corridors of the ancient hall. In that moment, time collapses. I am not just a witness, I am the heartbeat of this nightmare. I remember the smell of blood, thick and metallic, mixing with the pungent aroma of herbs simmering in the cauldron, a blend that lingers long after the chaos. Geraldine, the midwife, stands over the laboring woman, her hand stained with the evidence of life and death. Every contraction is a tidal wave of agony, and Geraldine feels each one reverberate in her bones. "Breathe, Marisol. Breathe." Her voice is a lifeline, yet it trembles with the weight of the world, of expectation, of judgment. She is a healer, but here, in this merciless realm of men, she is also a pariah. I remember the whispers that follow Geraldine. What does she know? She's just a woman. Each word is a dagger, piercing her resolve. In a society that worships the scalpel of the male physician, her hands, calloused and skilled, are reduced to mere superstition. The irony clings to her like the sweat on her brow. She delivers life, yet her own worth is shackled by the invisible chains of a patriarchal hierarchy. As Marisol gasps, enveloped in the throes of creation, I catch a glimpse of Isidore, the town's young surgeon, lurking in the periphery. He is caught between admiration and disdain. He knows of Geraldine's talents, he has seen her mend broken bodies with nothing but her intuition and a handful of herbs. But the moment he steps into the light, the air shifts. The collective breath of the men in the room, the town council gathered to witness this miracle, holds its tension tight. They look to him, the man in the white coat, expecting him to take control. The irony drips heavy like the rain outside, falling on the cobblestone streets. Isidore's hands, so capable, so trained, feel inadequate. Step aside, he snaps, his voice a brittle command. The room freezes, as if the very walls are holding their breath. Let me handle this. He strides forward, the embodiment of authority, but inside, he is a tempest. He knows that the moment he assumes power, he relinquishes the truth of what he has witnessed. He knows, deep down, that this woman, Geraldine, is a master at this dance of life and death, yet here he is, the one with the title, the one with the respected lineage. Don't listen to him, Marisol. Geraldine's voice cuts through the tension, fierce and unwavering. You push when it feels right, not because he says so. There's a fire in her eyes, a defiance that ignites something deep within Isidore. He has always admired her, the way she navigates this treacherous terrain, a woman adorned in the robes of a healer in a world that deems her unworthy. I remember the moment the tension snaps. Marisol's scream crescendos, it pierces the night, a haunting echo that fills every shadowy corner. Geraldine's hands move with a grace that defies the chaos. She murmurs ancient incantations, words handed down through generations of women who clutched life and death in their palms. The air thickens with hope and fear, mingled with the scent of sweat and herbs. Isidore watches, his heart racing. A part of him wants to step in, to impose his authority, but the other half, the part that resonates with the soul of the craft, wants to defer to her. The conflict within him is a tempest, a storm that threatens to tear him apart. He is but a boy with a scalpel, and she, a woman of the earth, a healer who knows the language of pain and joy in ways he cannot fathom. Another scream erupts, the cry of a newborn, born from the depths of struggle. Marisol collapses back against the straw, gasping, a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The child is handed to her, slick and wriggling. Geraldine's hands are trembling, both from fatigue and triumph. You did it, she whispers, a tear tracing the lines of her dirt-smeared face. You brought life into this world. But the moment hangs heavy, shadows closing in. Outside, the night thickens with an eerie silence, as if the universe is holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable storm to break. The council waits, a collection of men with narrowed eyes and clenched fists, as if they sense an encroaching battle, a fight not just against the elements, but against the very fabric of their beliefs. Isidore's chest tightens. He looks at Geraldine, her resolve shines with an intensity that dares him to challenge the status quo. A flicker of something ignites between them, shared defiance, unspoken understanding. In this moment, they are bound by an ancient truth that transcends their titles, their genders. Keep her here, Isidore finally says, voice steady, as if the words were always meant to escape him. We need her wisdom. The council members shift, astonished. Geraldine's eyes widen. She sees the shift, the breaking of chains that bind them both. The flickering candlelight casts a warm glow, illuminating the possibilities that stretch out before them like an uncharted horizon. But as the echo of Marisol's joy reverberates through the room, the shadows loom larger. The world outside is unforgiving, a tempest of societal norms, of rigid boundaries. The confrontation is just beginning. With each passing heartbeat, the stakes rise higher, and the societal constraints that strangle women in medicine tighten their grip, threatening to extinguish the fragile flame of change that Geraldine and Isidore have ignited. What happens next is a tremor in the fabric of their world, a struggle against the past, an attempt to carve out a new existence where women healers can stand side by side with men, not behind them. The story does not end here, it simply shifts, a continuous flow of tension, of hope and despair, of battles fought in whispered tones and shouts that echo through the ages. The night is far from over, and the real fight is just beginning. The fluorescent lights above flicker ominously, casting shadows that dance across the sterile walls of the hospital room. In the corner, a clock ticks on, each second echoing like a heartbeat of despair. "It's moving too fast," Clara whispers, her voice trembling, a thin thread of panic weaving through her words. She grips the edge of the bed, knuckles white, staring at the door, willing it to stay closed. Outside, the world carries on, but inside, she feels like a ghost haunting the ruins of her own life, trapped in a liminal space, suspended between hope and dread. The door swings open. Dr. Patel enters, her smile bright but her eyes shadowed with unspoken truths. "Clara," she begins, but the word hangs heavy, as if it's a warning, a shackle binding them both to this moment. Clara's heart races, not just from the fear of what's to come, but from the weight of stigma pressing down on her like a thick fog. She is not just a patient, she is a statistic, a label, or a woman with leukemia, a woman from a lower socio-economic background, a woman used to whispers and sidelong glances. "I can't help but wonder what they're saying," Clara confesses, her voice barely a whisper. "Do they think I brought this on myself?" The words slither out, and she feels the cold bite of shame wrap around her heart. The stigma of disease isn't just about the illness, it's the unspoken judgments that follow it, like shadows trailing her every step. Dr. Patel pauses, the air thick between them, laden with the knowledge that Clara's fear is not unfounded. "You deserve compassion, Clara. Not judgment." But even as she speaks, Dr. Patel's hands fidget with the charts, her professionalism a thin veneer over the discomfort. It's a dance they both know, a waltz around the unspoken stigma that surrounds Clara, that clings to her like a second skin. And then there's Marcus, the man who's been sitting in the corner, silent as a statue, yet alive with unvoiced thoughts. He's here for his own battle, a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, a sickness that has wrapped him in chains of isolation. He watches Clara, sees the way her breath hitches, the panic that flickers in her dark eyes. "I remember the first time I was hospitalized," he murmurs, as if speaking to the walls rather than to her. "I felt like a monster, like I was contagious." His voice is laced with a raw intensity that draws Clara in, pulls her away from the creeping shadows of her own fear. "I remember how they looked at me," he continues, "like I was a burden, or worse, like I was a mistake. Like I was less than human." The shared silence between them is a shared wound, a chasm filled with the ghosts of judgment. Clara looks at him, searching for connection, for understanding. "Do you ever wish you could just vanish?" she asks, the question a whisper that feels like a scream. "Every damn day," Marcus replies, his voice cracking under the weight of his truth. "But then I remember, I'm not the person they say I am. I'm more. I fight." His words are a spark in the dimness, igniting something in Clara. They sit together in that sterile room, two souls wrapped in the heavy cloak of societal stigma, their hearts thundering against the walls of isolation. The tension bends and snaps like a taut string. Suddenly, the door bursts open again, this time, it's a nurse, her arms laden with charts and impatient urgency. "We're ready for you, Clara," she says, her voice brisk, but there's a flicker of something in her eyes, a hint of sympathy, perhaps, or just exhaustion. Clara's heart pounds in her chest. This moment, this crossing of thresholds, is a battlefield. She glances at Marcus, and in that fleeting second, she sees his vulnerability reflected back at her. "What if they see me as broken?" she whispers, the fear clawing at the edges of her psyche. "They'll see what they want to see," he replies, the fire in his voice rising. "But you know who you are. Don't let them steal that from you." With those words, Clara stands, the weight of her stigma shifting, just slightly. She walks towards the door, each step a defiance against the silent judgments of the world outside. The fluorescent lights buzz above her, the air thick with tension, but she feels something else too, the flicker of hope igniting in her chest. As she passes the nurse, she gives a small nod, a gesture of recognition that says, "I am here, and I will not be silenced." The nurse returns the nod, a brief flicker of understanding passing between them, a moment that slices through the veil of stigma. In the room, Marcus watches her go, feeling the weight of his own battle. He thinks of the nights spent in darkness, the moments when he felt invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of a world that didn't understand him. He wishes he could say something more, something grand, but all that comes is a simple truth: you're stronger than they think, Clara. And as Clara disappears down the hallway, his words linger in the air, echoing against the sterile walls, a reminder that they are both fighting against the tide of stigma, each step a small act of rebellion against the shadows that haunt them. Outside, the world spins on, indifferent to their struggles, but within those walls, a revolution brews. It's the quiet uprising of the broken, the misunderstood, the invisible. Clara and Marcus, two souls tethered by the invisible strings of stigma, their journeys intertwined in a dance of defiance. The clock continues to tick, each second a reminder of the battles they face, the stigma they fight against, but inside, they know, they are not defined by what others see. They are warriors in their own right, armed with the fierce knowledge that their worth cannot be measured by society's cruel metrics. They are alive, and they will not be forgotten. And as the door closes behind Clara, the shadows don't just linger, they thicken, wrapping around Marcus, pulling him deeper into his own tumultuous thoughts. He looks down at the charts in his hands, his mind racing with the echoes of judgment, but beneath that lies a glimmer of resolve. The fight is far from over, it's only just begun. The air was thick with a stench that curled like smoke, a miasma of decay that clung to the stones of the cobbled streets. I remember the silence, the kind that screams louder than 1,000 voices. It was a Sunday, but church bells lay silent, their clanging swallowed by dread. I stood outside the crumbling door of an apothecary, heart pounding against my ribs, like a caged animal wanting to break free. I had heard the whispers, the tales that slithered through the alleys, the Black Death. It wasn't just a name, it was a shadow that swallowed the light, a ghost that reached out with skeletal fingers to touch the living. Inside, a man named Elias, a doctor with bloodshot eyes and a threadbare coat, studied his instruments laid out like the grim relics of a forgotten war. The tools, rusty scalpels, glass vials, were symbols of hope and despair, hope for healing, despair for the bodies they had failed. Each time he looked at them, I saw the flicker of a soul wrestling with its own impotence, the weight of lives lost pressing down like a stone in his gut. They bathed once a year, he had told me once, his voice a raspy whisper, so yeah, romance was earthy. In that moment, I couldn't tell if he was joking or if the absurdity was just another mask for the laughter that echoed in the void of our reality. The scent of sweat and sickness hung in the air, mingled with something else, fear. The townsfolk had turned their backs on doctors, their eyes wild with suspicion. Who could trust a man with a scalpel when their loved ones lay cold and lifeless, pale against the backdrop of a world gone mad? They had begun to speak in hushed tones of quackery and deceit. "Better the devil we know," they muttered, clutching rosaries like talismans, believing that prayers could turn the tide against a tide of death. Then there was Anna, a nurse with hands that trembled like leaves in a storm. She wore her heart on her sleeve, and each patient she lost carved a new line into her soul. I watched her as she moved through the chaos, a ghost among the living, her eyes haunted by the shadows of the dead. She treated the sick with a fierce tenderness, wrapping them in blankets as if they were fragile porcelain. "Hold on," she would whisper, gripping their hands with desperation, but in the dark corners of her heart, a whisper of doubt gnawed at her, a fear that love alone might not be enough to stave off the inevitable. I remember the night when the village erupted into chaos. The cries of mourning turned the air electric, a cacophony of despair that pierced through the thick walls of denial. A child, barely 5, collapsed in the mud, her laughter snuffed out like a candle in the wind. I watched as Elias rushed to her side, hands trembling, and you could see the battle raging within him. He was a doctor, yet he felt like a fraud in this moment of truth, facing the limits of his power. "What do I do?" he gasped, as if the question itself could conjure an answer. The little girl's mother clawed at the air, desperate, grasping at the straws of faith that were slipping through her fingers. That night, the town became a crucible of fears, the shadows of men whispering of reckoning. Why? I wanted to scream into the void. Why this? Why now? But the only reply was the rustle of leaves, the sigh of a world too tired to answer. I felt the clock tick, each second a reminder of our mortality, each chime a heartbeat lost. The moon hung low, an ominous eye judging our every move, lighting the path of despair with a cold glow. Days blurred into nights, and every dawn felt like the beginning of a funeral procession. The streets were littered with the remnants of lives, crumpled blankets, abandoned toys, whispers of laughter fading into echoes. Anna had stopped smiling. Elias had stopped believing. We all wore masks, not just against the plague but against the truth that we were standing at the edge of the abyss, teetering on the brink of oblivion. But then, something shifted. The townsfolk began to notice the small acts of defiance, Elias stitching wounds with a steady hand, Anna cradling the weak as if they were all that remained of her shattered dreams. There was a new understanding brewing, a fragile glimmer of hope that perhaps the bond between healer and healed could withstand even the most relentless of predators. One evening, I found Anna in the garden, her fingers tracing the petals of a flower that bloomed defiantly amid the decay. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would shatter the fragile moment. I nodded, feeling the weight of our shared grief as we stood in the dusk. "We cannot let the darkness win," she said, her eyes fierce with determination, yet tears shimmering at the edges. Her spirit ignited something within me, an ember of resistance that flickered against the encroaching gloom. I remember thinking, what if the doctors, the healers, the lovers, what if we were all just branches of the same tree, bending but not breaking? Elias joined us, drawing closer, his heart heavy yet resolute. In that moment, we were not just a doctor and a nurse, we were a tapestry woven from the threads of loss, laughter, and an unyielding will to fight back against the encroaching shadows. But the plague was relentless, an unseen predator lurking in every corner, waiting for weakness. The struggle continued, the battle against the void, the haunting knowledge that for every life saved, another might fall. And as the stars blinked above, I felt the weight of history closing in. What would they say of us? Would they remember our courage or our cowardice? I looked out into the darkening horizon, and the world felt impossibly vast, like the cosmos itself was holding its breath. I held on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, in the face of despair, we could carve out a sliver of light, a testament of resilience that would echo through time, if only we could survive to tell the tale. The moon hung heavy in the sky, a ghostly orb whispering secrets to the slumbering earth. In a small, dimly lit room, the air was thick with the scent of crushed leaves and desperation, a pungent mix that clawed at the throat. I was there, on my knees, the chilling ache of my mother's labored breaths echoing in the silence, each gasp a harbinger of dread. The clock ticked ominously, counting down the moments, mocking our fading hope. In this desperate hour, I clutched a handful of herbs, their green vitality a stark contrast to the pallor of her skin. The rosemary was fresh, the chamomile crumbled in my palm like a forgotten dream. "Please," I murmured, begging the universe, the spirits of the plants, let these heal her. I remember the stories, the legends of old, how the earth cradled our ailments within her embrace, how the roots and petals bore the weight of centuries, yet here I was, a mere boy, wrestling with a truth both ancient and raw, and nature's bounty had limits, and I felt them sharp as needles against my skin. Across the room, my sister Leah trembled, her hands wrapped tight around a vial of tincture, the amber liquid swirling like our shattered hopes. "It's not enough," she whispered, a tremor in her voice that sliced through the heavy fog of despair. Her eyes, wide and haunted, searched mine for certainty, for a miracle that I couldn't conjure. What if we lose her? I wanted to scream, to lash out at the fates, to demand the very heavens open up and pour forth healing. But what was left to say? The herbs gathered on the table seemed to taunt us then, their promises of relief overshadowed by the shadows closing in around us. I gathered my resolve, grasping at the threads of knowledge passed down through whispered tales. "We can try more," I stammered, shaking with a mix of fear and determination. "The lavender, the willow bark, they can calm her." Leah shook her head, tears spilling like rain. "But what if it's not enough? What if the land has turned against us?" Her words twisted like thorns in my heart, for I knew the truth. In our small village, the soil was weary, the plants less potent than the stories foretold. I felt the weight of my ancestors' failures pressing down, their voices echoing in the corners of my mind. We had relied too heavily on the earth, too blind to see the scars we'd carved into her flesh. The flickering candlelight danced, casting shadows that morphed into ghosts, remnants of lost souls who had turned to the earth in desperate times. I could almost hear their whispers, urging me to remember, the witch who brewed tea from nettles, the healer who combined the fiery sting of ginger with the soft touch of honey. Each one a testament to resilience, each one a reminder that for every ailment, there existed a cure in the wild, if only one had the courage to seek it. But the courage was slipping from my grasp, like sand through open fingers. The room felt like a prison, the walls closing in as I gathered the herbs, my fingers trembling. I could sense the weight of expectation pressing down on me, the impossible task sat squarely on my shoulders, the responsibility of life and death. My mother's breaths were shallow, a haunting rhythm that sent shivers down my spine. I remembered her laughter, her stories of bright fields and heavy blooms, how the world once pulsed with life and promise. And now it looked like a graveyard of possibilities. I moved to the window, desperate to find solace in the moonlight. But the darkness outside seemed alive with judgment and despair. It whispered of limitations, the world was changing, the herbs we relied upon were fading, and there was no herbalist to guide us through the haze of fear. The shadows crept closer, wrapping around my heart like a vice, and I felt an uninvited chill crawl up my spine, a reminder of the scars on the land where nothing grew. "Leah," I called, my voice trembling as I turned to her, "do you remember the stories grandmother told us? About the power of the earth?" My heart raced, drawing strength from those memories. She said if you listen closely, the plants will tell you what to do. Leah's eyes flickered with a spark of hope, but it was quickly extinguished by a wave of doubt suffocating the air around us. "But what if it's not enough?" she cried, anguish spilling from her lips like a broken dam. "What if the soil has turned against us entirely?" I wanted to scream, to tell her that we could fight this, that we could coax a miracle from the earth, but the words lodged in my throat. I felt the weight of my own insecurities, of the inadequacy blooming like a foul weed in my heart. What did I know of healing? What did I know of life or death? That shadow of doubt loomed larger, threatening to swallow us whole. I gathered the herbs into a bowl, a frantic attempt to summon the ancient magic that once thrived in the roots and stems. "We'll mix them," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We'll infuse them, create something new, something potent." As I worked, I remembered grandmother's hands, wise and weathered, moving with a rhythm that felt like a dance. I closed my eyes, letting the memories wash over me. I felt her presence, an echo of strength, guiding my hands as they moved almost instinctively. "We can do this," I murmured fiercely, the urgency of the moment propelling me forward. Leah knelt beside me, her trembling fingers brushing against mine, each movement a silent plea for assurance. I looked at her, and in that moment, I understood, it wasn't just about the herbs, it was about the bond we shared, the flickering flame of hope igniting amidst the shadows. Together, we could face the darkness. The world outside seemed to hold its breath, the wind paused, and for a moment, the weight of our fears lifted just slightly. The moonlight bathed the room in silver, illuminating our small sanctuary. As we crushed the leaves, the aromas melded together, a symphony of scent that promised revival, a resurrection of sorts amid the looming despair. But there were no guarantees. Only the pulse of our hearts, the synchronicity of our breaths as we worked together, frantically weaving hope into our creation. The ghostly whispers of the past surrounded us, compelling us to remember the power of the earth and the bonds of family. Yet still, I felt the clock ticking, each second a reminder of the urgency that loomed over us. And so we labored, crafting our concoction in the shadows, knowing that the answers lay buried deep in the soil, waiting for us to unearth them. Each herb, each tincture was a whisper of defiance against the encroaching darkness, our last stand against fate itself, and I could almost hear the cosmos holding its breath, waiting for the outcome of our desperate gamble. Blood stains the floor like a forgotten memory, the scent of iron curling in the air, thick and suffocating. Nearby, a lamp flickers, casting shadows that seem to dance, mocking the desperate cries of the injured man sprawled across the table. His face twisted in agony, eyes wide, reflecting not just the pain but the lingering fear of uncertainty. Around him, the figures loom large, barber surgeons, their soiled aprons a testament to their trade, their hands stained with the crimson of lives both saved and lost. I remember the first time I stood in a room like this, the scent of singed hair and alcohol mingling with the warmth of sweat. I was a child then, my small fingers gripping the edge of a rough-hewn bench, heart pounding in my chest, each thump a reminder of what lay in store. The barber surgeon, a hulking figure with a voice like thunder, wielded his instruments with a confidence that both terrified and fascinated me. "Fear not," he bellowed, as ominous as the storm cloud swirling outside. "This will hurt you more than it hurts me." He grinned, but there was a madness in his eyes, a flicker of something primal that sent chills crawling up my spine. The surgeon's blade glinted, a sliver of silver against the muted browns and reds of the chamber. I had witnessed battles, but none as fierce as those fought on this table, where flesh met metal in a dance of desperation. The barber surgeon was both healer and executioner, a jester in a tragic play, performing his art with a precision that belied the chaos swirling around him. He was a man of contradictions, an alchemist of sorts, transforming pain into relief, or perhaps relief into pain, depending on one's view. Across the room, a physician stood, a figure draped in heavy robes, hands clasped, brow furrowed. He held a tome, ancient and dusty, as if the secrets of the universe lay hidden within its pages. The physician's world was one of theory, of scholarly pursuits, while the barber surgeon danced on the edge of reality, a daredevil flirting with death and life alike. "You cannot cut what you do not understand," the physician barked, his voice a sharp contrast to the chaotic symphony of the operating room. But the barber surgeon merely chuckled, a sound that vibrated through the air, gritty and real. But I can cut. And it's the cutting that brings them to me, good doctor." I remember the tension hanging thick in the air, an invisible thread connecting the two men. The physician with his educated airs, and the barber surgeon, a man forged in the fires of necessity. Each filled with their own brand of conviction, both certain they possessed the truth, yet how different their truths were. The physician worried over hygiene, over the delicate balance of humors, while the barber surgeon cared little for such abstractions, focused instead on the immediate, on the gushing wound before him, the heartbeat fading like the last flicker of a dying candle. The man on the table screamed again, a sound that echoed through the chamber, raw and primal, a plea cast into the void. I shifted, caught in a web of emotions, yearning for the physician's knowledge to triumph, for the surgeon's grit to prevail. But who was I, a mere spectator, to claim a side? My gaze drifted to the table, where the barber surgeon leaned closer, his breath warm against the man's skin. "Now, lad, we're going to take care of this. Just breathe for me." But the man, eyes wide with panic, could hardly breathe at all. In that moment, I saw it, the flicker of doubt in the barber surgeon's eyes. Could he save this man? Or was he, too, merely playing a game of chance, throwing dice with fate? Fear pulsed through the room, a living entity that wrapped around us like a vice. I could almost taste it, a metallic tang that mingled with the stench of sweat. I had long since learned that fear could be a weapon, a tool used to extract truths buried deep within us. "Why do you do this?" I found myself asking, my voice barely above a whisper, desperate to understand this dance of life and death unfolding before me. The barber surgeon paused, glancing at me with a mix of irritation and something softer, something almost human. "Because, child, in this world, it is better to be feared than loved. The ones who fear me come to me, and in that fear, they find their courage. I hold their lives in my hands." He turned back to the patient, the weight of his words heavy in the air. I watched, breathless, as he plunged the knife into flesh, the man's body tensing, a creature caught in a trap, fighting against the inevitable. Tension crackled, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of terror. The physician's voice sliced through the moment, sharp and clinical, a reminder of the order that struggled against the chaos of the surgeon's craft. "You're not a real doctor. You're a butcher." But the barber surgeon merely laughed, a sound that rang hollow, bouncing off the walls like a ghost. "Aye, and if it be a butcher that saves a life, then let me be the finest butcher there ever was." The room held its breath, caught between two worlds, the world of knowledge and the world of instinct, the world of healing and the world of pain. I felt the weight of the moment, the fragility of life hanging on a thread, as the barber surgeon worked, his hand steady, the blade gliding through flesh like a whisper, a promise, a gamble. In that dimly lit room, bathed in shadows and the flickering light of the lamp, the tension rose, a crescendo of emotion, a storm brewing just beyond the walls. The patient's breath quickened, each gasp a silent scream, fear, desperation, hope all intertwined. And I stood there, engulfed in the chaos of it all, a spectator witnessing the birth of a new era, where the distinction between healer and butcher blurred, where the line between life and death wavered like smoke in the air. The moment stretched and twisted, unraveling into a dizzying spiral of emotion and tension, till all that remained was the raw, visceral pulse of humanity, imperfect, chaotic, and achingly alive. The chill in the air was sharp, slicing through the dimly lit room, where shadows danced like tortured souls. The flickering candlelight fought valiantly against the encroaching darkness, casting grotesque shapes on the stone walls. I stood there, heart pounding, as I watched Brother Anselm, his hands trembling, struggle to steady the vial of shimmering liquid that promised life, or death. The air was thick with anticipation. It was as if the very fabric of life hung in that precarious balance, suspended between hope and despair. "Please, Anselm, you must act quickly," I pleaded, my voice a strangled whisper that echoed against the cold stone. My brother, Thomas, lay on the straw-strewn floor, his breath ragged and shallow, as if the very essence of his being was slipping away. The fever had consumed him, a merciless beast gnawing at his insides, and I could do nothing but stand witness to his suffering, a helpless spectator in a macabre theatre of life and death. Time is the enemy," Anselm muttered, sweat beading on his brow. His desperation mirrored my own. He was a scholar of alchemy, a man who had devoted his life to the pursuit of knowledge, yet here we were, faced with the unfathomable power of mortality. Did he truly believe that the concoction of herbs, metallic dust, and luminous essence could pull my brother back from the abyss? I remember the first time I saw Anselm in the market, his wild hair a chaotic halo. He had been raving about the philosopher's stone, the legendary substance that could transmute base metals into gold, grant immortality, and heal the sick. I laughed then, a sound that echoed like a bell in a silent chapel. How absurd, how utterly ridiculous. Yet, here I was, clinging to the hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the old tales held a grain of truth. I felt the ironic weight of my disbelief. The very cynicism that had defined my existence now felt like a noose tightening around my throat. "Anselm, please!" I implored again, my voice rising, filled with an urgency that bordered on madness. In that moment, everything else faded, the distant sounds of the bustling city outside, the laughter of children playing in the streets, even the memory of joy seemed to dissolve into the ether. All I could see was Thomas, pale and fragile, a ghost of the vibrant boy who had once sprinted through the fields, laughter trailing behind him like a shadow. Anselm's gaze flickered between the vial and Thomas, torn between the weight of knowledge and the burden of responsibility. "What if it doesn't work?" he whispered, the words heavy with dread. What if I only hasten his end?" I could feel the trepidation radiating from him, a tremor that echoed in my own soul. What was it about the pursuit of knowledge that so often led to ruin? How many lives had been lost in the name of ambition, in the quest for understanding that danced just out of reach? "Then we will find another way," I shouted, my voice raw with emotion. I had not known such fear before. It gnawed at my insides like a hungry wolf, unsated and relentless. The thought of losing Thomas sent a chill racing through my veins, and I felt the weight of my heart hammering against my ribcage, fierce and desperate. "We cannot let him slip away." In that moment, time felt suspended, the world outside a blur of inconsequence. Anselm's hesitation was a chasm between us, a void filled with unspoken fears and the echo of dreams unfulfilled. Would we forever be haunted by the spectre of failure? Would alchemy, that mystic dance of elements, prove to be merely a cruel illusion, a trick played by the universe to taunt us? I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to believe in the impossible, to trust in the alchemical arts that had captured the imaginations of so many. "All right," Anselm finally said, his resolve hardening. He turned the vial toward Thomas, the liquid glinting ominously as he brought it closer. "But if this fails, don't speak of failure," I interrupted, my voice trembling but fierce. "Speak only of hope." As the shimmering liquid descended onto Thomas's lips, I held my breath, 1,000 prayers spilling forth into the silence. The air crackled with anticipation, a tension so thick it felt as though it could be sliced with a knife. I watched, enraptured by the drama unfolding before me, caught between despair and longing. And then, nothing. The moment stretched, time hanging like a pendulum, oscillating between hope and despair. I could hear the ticking of a clock somewhere in the distant recesses of my mind, its rhythm steady, mocking. Seconds turned to minutes, and still, Thomas lay there, as if caught in a dream, trapped between the realms of life and death. But the silence shattered as a violent cough erupted from him, a rasping sound that filled the room with a wild, untamed energy. My heart raced, the pulse resonating through my veins, each beat echoing the thrill of possibility. Could it be? Had the alchemical secrets woven into that vial whispered a miracle into existence? And then I saw it, fear flickering in Anselm's eyes, the same terror that clawed at my own heart. What if the potion brought more than healing? What if it unleashed something darker, something beyond our understanding? The air crackled with the weight of unspoken truths, of the very essence of life itself hanging by a thread. Just then, the walls began to pulse, shadows moving with a life of their own, swirling around us like phantoms of the past. I felt the weight of history pressing down, the echoes of countless seekers of truth who had traveled this path before us. The room was alive with the whispers of those who had dared to dance with the cosmos, to reach for the stars, only to be consumed by their own ambition. Anselm, what have we done? I stammered, my voice quaking under the pressure of sudden revelation. The shadows seemed to close in, a gathering storm threatening to unleash its wrath. I don't know, he replied, his voice barely above a breath. The unknown loomed before us, a yawning chasm filled with both dread and wonder. In that moment, I understood the true weight of alchemy, a relentless pursuit of knowledge that could twist into madness, a mirror reflecting our darkest desires and fears. And as Thomas's eyes fluttered open, the flicker of awareness igniting within them, I could feel the ground shifting beneath us, the very foundation of our beliefs trembling at the edge of discovery. What lay beyond that threshold, I couldn't say. But the air hummed with a palpable energy, the tension thick and electric, propelling us forward into the unknown, and I knew that our journey had only just begun. The candle flickered, casting a tremulous light that danced on the stone walls, as the sharp scent of burning beeswax filled the air. In the corner of the dimly lit room, Eleanor knelt, her fingers trembling over the small, worn amulet that hung from her neck, the one her mother had given her long ago. It was a simple piece, a shard of quartz nestled in twisted metal, its surface smudged with the fingerprints of fear and desperation. Just hours ago, her brother Thomas had collapsed, his breath shallow, his face ashen, a ghost tethered to the world by the merest thread of life. "Please, let it work," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. The shadows seemed to listen, wrapping around her like a cold embrace, weighing heavier with each heartbeat. Outside, the wind howled, a banshee wailing through the night, as if echoing her fears. Across the room, a figure shifted, a healer, bent and wizened, with eyes that glimmered like shards of broken glass. Abella, a woman steeped in the old ways, her hands calloused and wise, approached Thomas's still body. "He needs more than a charm," she murmured, her voice low and gravelly, the weight of countless years etched in the lines on her face. Eleanor's heart thundered against her ribcage. "What do you mean? This amulet was blessed by the old ones. It has to work." Abella's gaze softened, revealing a flicker of understanding, but the shadows in her eyes lingered with the knowledge of harsh truths. "Belief is powerful, child," she replied, "but this is no ordinary sickness. Dark forces twist in the air like smoke, and simple charms may not be enough." Eleanor's hands clenched around the amulet, feeling its jagged edges bite into her palm. "What do you know of dark forces?" she spat, anger rising like bile. "You speak as if you know the very roots of despair. You're nothing but an old woman clinging to old tales." The air thickened, the tension palpable. Abella's expression remained calm, a stark contrast to Eleanor's turmoil. "My tales are steeped in truth, child. Magic, in all its forms, has its price." In that moment, Eleanor felt the weight of her grief and fury, a storm brewing within her. She had watched her family crumble under the weight of illness, of fear, her father lost to the plague, her mother's heart shattered in mourning. She had sought solace in the charms of old, believing they could shield them from the darkness. Why do you cling to hope? Abella asked softly, cutting through the haze of Eleanor's anger. Hope is a cruel mistress. It dances in the light but leaves you blind in the dark. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat, the truth of those words striking her with the force of 1,000 thorns. What else is there? She could feel her heart beating like a war drum, each thud echoing the desperation lancing through her veins. If I let go of hope, what will be left of us? The healer's eyes darkened as she stepped closer to Thomas, placing her hands above him, fingers splayed like the delicate wings of a moth. Sometimes, to save a life, one must be willing to sacrifice. To sacrifice. The word hung in the air, heavy and foreboding, as if it were a ghost whispering secrets of unspeakable choices. Eleanor's mind raced with visions of the unspeakable. Would she let her brother slip away, powerless to intervene? Or was there a deeper magic, an ancient ritual that could stir the very fabric of life and death? I would do anything, she breathed, each word laced with raw emotion, the point of decision sharpening like a knife's edge. Tell me what you need. Abella fixed her with a steady gaze, the weight of the decision creeping into the silence, each second stretching into infinity. You must bring forth an object of great significance, one that binds you to him, one that holds your love. The air crackled with tension, Eleanor's mind reeling. She remembered the small toy horse Thomas had clutched as a child, the one she had hidden away. She remembered the laughter that once echoed through their home, now only a hollow memory. The horse? I can get it, she whispered, as if speaking the words aloud would shatter the fragile thread of hope that hung between them. Then go, child, Abella urged, her voice a low murmur. Time is not our ally. Bring it here, and we will weave the magic that may bring him back. As Eleanor turned to leave, the shadows seemed to reach out, clawing at her heels, whispering doubts and fears. But above it all, a flicker of hope ignited within her, a beacon illuminating the path ahead. She would not let darkness claim her brother. Outside, the night enveloped her, stars flickering like distant memories against the velvet sky. The world was alive with the pulse of the unknown, each step towards home felt like a heartbeat. She could almost hear the echoes of laughter, ghosts of a past time, urging her on. In the depths of her heart, Eleanor understood the price of magic, the weight it carried, the shadows it summoned. But in that moment, none of it mattered. She would face whatever came, for Thomas, for the remnants of innocence that still clung to her soul. Time ticked forward, relentless, as she raced against the darkness. Each breath was a prayer, each heartbeat a vow. The old legends whispered in her ear, tales of charms that flickered in the twilight, of amulets that bore the weight of hope and despair, each one a fragile promise etched in the marrow of existence. With the weight of the world on her shoulders and the spectre of loss looming behind her, Eleanor grasped the amulet tighter. In that moment, she embraced the chaos, the heartbreak, the fragile web of humanity woven into the fabric of magic and belief. The night stretched endlessly before her, and she would not falter. Not now. Not ever. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of sweat and desperation, as the dull thrum of moans echoed through the dimly lit chamber. I remember the flickering shadows, a dance of uncertainty, as I stood there clutching a blooded cloth. The walls, cracked and peeling, whispered secrets of lives hanging by a thread. I had thought I was a healer, but in that moment, faced with the pallid figure of a fevered man, I felt more like a butcher. Please, I can't breathe, he gasped, his eyes wide, pupils glimmering with the reflection of his impending doom. And there I was, caught in a tempest of ethical chaos, my heart pounding with the weight of decisions too burdensome to bear. What was healing, I wondered, when every pulse of hope felt intertwined with the knife's edge? Across the room, Agnes trembled, her hands trembling as she held a thin vial of laudanum, my partner in this grim dance. Once, we dreamed of saving lives, our ambitions wrapped in the silk of nobility. But now we were mere shadows, grasping at the hollow shell of our ideals. Is it too late? She whispered, fear threading through her voice like a needle through fabric. I could see it in her eyes, the flicker of doubt, the gnawing question, was it right to offer peace through oblivion? What if he wakes? I said, voice hoarse. What if he suffers? And yet, what if he didn't wake at all? The irony lay heavy, a twisted joke in a world that deemed us gods while knowing we were only men, fallible, flawed, and utterly lost. The man's breath came in rattling gasps, a cruel rhythm that set my teeth on edge. I thought of consent, that fragile thread of dignity that hung in the air like a spider's web glistening with dew. Did he understand? Did he even want to understand? We can ease your pain, I urged, though my own voice cracked under the weight of unknowing. You won't feel a thing. But could I promise him that? I remember staring into his depthless gaze, seeking an answer in the abyss of his fear. And I saw the flicker of hope, the desperate grasp for life battling against the creeping tendrils of agony. A decision loomed like a storm cloud, dark and unforgiving. A chill swept through me, a shiver akin to standing naked in a winter's night. I could hear Agnes's heart racing, a wild drum signaling our impending doom. What if it's wrong, she implored, her voice barely a whisper. What if he could survive? But survival often came at a cost, his life for our conscience, a moral ledger that weighed heavier with each passing breath. In that moment, time twisted, a cruel trickster. I saw flashes of our past, students in the cobbled streets of the university, laughing as we dissected cadavers, unearthing the secrets of the human form with glee. They bathed once a year, I chuckled, so yeah, romance was earthy. But such frivolity felt like a ghost now, a mere figment of a life that once promised salvation. Will you help me? The man rasped, his voice a threadbare whisper, each word a tremor that rattled my core. My hand shook, drawing closer to the vial. I longed to comfort him, to take away the pain that gnawed at his being. But in doing so, would I strip him of his agency, his choice, granting him a gift that bore the weight of death? Please, he begged again. Was this consent? Or was it desperation? The line blurred like ink on parchment, and I was drowning in the murky waters of morality. The darkness deepened, shadows creeping closer, and for a heartbeat, I felt the weight of history, every healer who ever stood at this precipice, torn between compassion and cruelty. I thought of the oaths we took, words echoing in the silence of our hearts, promising to do no harm. But what harm could be greater than watching a soul suffer? Agnes, I murmured, caught between the chasm of our ideals and the stark reality before us. Is it wrong to end this suffering? Her eyes glimmered with tears, and I understood, she felt it too, the gnawing fear that our hands could be instruments of mercy or of doom. Then came a quiet knock at the door, a reminder that the world outside spun on, indifferent to our struggles. A figure stepped in, the town crier, face pale, eyes wide. They say the plague has returned, he stammered. The words hung heavy, a harbinger of doom, and I felt the walls close in, suffocating the last flickers of hope. Are we to choose who lives and who dies? I grappled with the enormity of it all. The man before me, the sick and the suffering, were they not also our brothers, our kin? What if we save him, only for him to perish on the streets? The air crackled with tension, a storm brewing as Agnes and I locked eyes, a shared understanding binding us in that suffocating moment. We were intertwined in this macabre tableau, each heartbeat a drum signaling our impending choice. The man's breath faltered, and I saw it, a flicker of understanding, a plea that transcended words. I want to be free, he whispered, a ghostly echo that resonated within me. And in that moment, a decision crystallized, sharp and clear as the knife I had once dreaded. I lifted the vial, hand shaking, heart racing. The world around me faded, shrinking to the singular point of our decision, a choice made in a realm where virtue and vice collided, where ethics and morality blurred beneath the dim light of fate. And as I poured the contents into the glass, I felt the weight of history settle deeply upon my shoulders, a shroud of ghosts who had walked this path before. We were all bound together in this tragedy, each life a story intertwined, a thread in the tapestry of existence. The shadows loomed heavier, the walls pulsating with an eerie heartbeat, as I leaned closer to the man, his gaze capturing mine. I can offer you peace. In that suspended breath, I became both healer and harbinger, the echoes of our choices trailing behind like the specters of our past. And that night, the line between life and death blurred, the weight of our decisions forever etched upon our souls, as we plunged into the darkness of what it meant to truly care. The room smelled of antiseptic and despair, a sterile prison where hope flickered like a dying bulb. I stood at the threshold, eyes drawn to the figure huddled in the corner, breathing shallow, trembling. It was my mother. She had once been the sun, radiating warmth, laughter spilling from her lips like golden light. Now, wrapped in a hospital gown that clung to her frail body, she looked more like a ghost than the woman who had taught me to face the world. A diagnosis loomed like an ominous storm cloud, threatening to swallow us whole. Mom. My voice trembled, the word barely escaping my throat. She looked up, her eyes, once vibrant and full of life, clouded with uncertainty. In that moment, silence became a monster, gnawing at my insides, and I hated the way it seemed to laugh at us both. "I'm okay, honey," she whispered, though her smile wavered, a fragile facade. I wanted to scream, wanted to shake her, to make her see that each breath she struggled to take was a reminder of how precarious her existence had become. But fear gripped me tighter than the freshly bandaged wounds on her arms. The chance of misdiagnosis haunted me, a specter in the back of my mind. They could be wrong, they could be so very wrong. I glanced at the doctor, standing too casually against the wall, arms folded like a sentinel guarding secrets. Dr. Hayes had the kind of face that promised assurance but delivered anxiety, a pleasant smile that felt rehearsed, a calm demeanor that concealed the chaos of possibility. I watched as he spoke, his words wrapped in clinical detachment, the way one might recite poetry in an empty room. "We suspect it might be something serious, but we need more tests." Those words echoed, each syllable slicing through my chest like a jagged knife. "It could be an autoimmune disorder. We'll have the results in a few days." Days. Days stretched into an abyss, a void where hope and despair collided, and all I could do was nod, feeling the world around me start to crumble. I wanted to shake him, to demand clarity, but instead, I turned back to my mother, whose gaze was fixed on the ceiling, searching for answers in the sterile tiles above. "Mom, they'll figure it out," I said, but even I didn't believe the lie. Each word felt like a betrayal, a hollow promise that clung to the air like smoke. In the days that followed, I became a ghost myself. My mother's laughter faded as she withered under the weight of uncertainty, her spirit slowly extinguishing like a candle snuffed out in the dark. I was lost in a maze of medical jargon and half-formed diagnoses, drowning in a sea of confusion. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were caught in a cruel game, the stakes so high they made me dizzy. The nurse appeared at my mother's side, a bright smile painted on her face, but her eyes betrayed the strain. "Everything will be fine, Mrs. Thomas. Just a few more tests." I wanted to scream in her face, to pull back the veil of false reassurance. Tests? What if they were wrong? What if her weakness was brushed off as fatigue, or something as mundane as stress? The clock on the wall ticked with a cruel rhythm, an incessant reminder of time slipping away, moments wasted in a waiting room that felt more like purgatory. I paced, heart hammering, thoughts racing. What if? What if? What if? Each question was a ghost, haunting me, taunting me with the specter of failure. Then came the day of reckoning. The results arrived, shrouded in the sterile envelope that felt like a death sentence. I could see the unease on Dr. Hayes' face as he entered the room, the way his jaw tightened. "We need to talk," he said, and I felt the ground beneath me give way. The words spilled from his mouth like dark ink, each syllable staining the air. "It's not what we thought. It's worse." My world collapsed. My mother's breath hitched, her fingers curling into fists, and I felt the heat of rage and despair boiling within me. I wanted to lash out, to demand justice for the missteps, the moments stolen by indecision and doubt. How many lives had been lost in the fine print of a diagnosis? "Can't you do something?" I pleaded, desperation clawing at my throat. "Can't you try again?" But Dr. Hayes looked haunted, like a man who had failed too many times. The weight of his helplessness fell heavy in the room, suffocating us all. "Sometimes we have to make choices with very little information," he said, but I heard only the echoes of regret. Choices. Each one a potential grave mistake. Days turned into weeks, and the hospital became our second home. I watched my mother fade under the fluorescent lights, her spirit dimming like the flicker of a dying star. Reflections of her past life flickered in her eyes, in memories of warmth, of laughter, and of family dinners that felt like a lifetime ago. There was a moment, just one fleeting second, where I saw her fighting to keep herself alive, but it was as if she were trying to swim against a tide that grew higher with each passing day. "Mom, please," I whispered one night, sitting beside her in the darkened room. "Don't give up." But my words felt like ashes in my mouth, each syllable crumbling into dust. I felt like a child lost in a nightmare, unable to wake, paralyzed by fear of the unknown. A knock at the door broke me from my thoughts. A social worker entered, her presence an unwelcome reminder of the bureaucracy that loomed over us. "We need to discuss end-of-life options," she said, but the words felt like daggers, each one plunging deeper than the last. I stood, rage boiling over. "No. Not yet. You don't get to decide this." But deep down, I felt the cracks forming, her body a battleground, and the enemy was a misdiagnosis, a slip of the tongue that spiraled into chaos. I still remember the night we stood at the edge of the abyss, my mother, a shadow of herself, and I, a fragment of the boy who once saw the world as a canvas of infinite possibilities. We were both teetering, caught in a web spun from fear and shattered dreams, desperately clinging to the frayed threads of hope. The quiet hum of machines around us felt like a countdown, each beep echoing our desperation. I clutched her hand, willing her to hold on, but as the darkness crept closer, I wondered if we'd both already lost in a game dictated by the perils of diagnosis, where the stakes were life and death, and the consequences were irrevocable. And so we spiraled, two souls caught in the grip of fate, where the line between healing and harm blurred into an unrecognizable haze. The world outside continued to spin, but for us, time had become a ghost, haunting every breath we took. A lantern flickered, casting a tremor of light across the damp stones of the alleyway. Shadows danced, twisting and twining like serpents, and within that fragile illumination stood a figure, a physician, draped in a cloak that clung to him like the weight of his own failures. He was Jacob, and he could hear the distant wails of a patient, a child, in his mind like an unending echo. "Please, help," the child had cried. But it wasn't Jacob who had answered. It was a herbalist, a wild-haired woman named Eloan, her hand stained with the colors of nature, with remedies drawn from roots and earth. The air crackled with tension, thick enough to choke on. Eloan's eyes, fierce and unyielding, pierced through the night. "You think your potions can save them?" she shouted, voice raw with defiance. "You think your books can outsmart death?" Jacob clenched his jaw, every syllable like a dagger plunging into his soul. "And you think wildflowers will cure the plague?" His breath hung heavy in the air, the scent of burning herbs mixing with the stench of decay. They were in a war of words, but it was a battlefield where lives hung in the balance, and the ground was soaked with the blood of their rivalry. The moon, a pale observer in the sky, held its breath. Each flicker of the lantern seemed to frame their argument, painting them as doomed lovers caught in a tragic ballet of egos and despair. Jacob recalled the time he had watched her charm a fever from a child with nothing but a handful of petals and whispered incantations. He had scoffed then, but now, standing in the embrace of desperation, he questioned everything. "Your science isn't infallible, Jacob." Eloan spat, her voice trembling with emotion. "You can't control the cosmos. You don't understand the darkness that swallows us whole." And there it was, the pulsing heart of their conflict, the raw truth that neither could escape, the universe, cruel and indifferent. He remembered the day his mentor had died, the old man's face twisted in agony. The books had not saved him, pure knowledge had faltered against the onslaught of fate. Eloan took a step closer, her breath mingling with his. "You hide behind your scalpel and your ink. But I've seen the truth. I've walked among the fallen. You forget the human heart, the soul's ache." They were both flawed, both tangled in their obsessions, she with her ancient remedies, he with his modern certainties. They had carved their paths from the same grief, yet here they stood, locked in a dance of proud ignorance, blinded by their convictions. And then there was the shadow of the clergy, Father Matthias, lurking in the background like a spectre, waiting for the right moment to interject. He was a man of God, but also a man of power, his voice woven with the authority of the heavens. You both think yourselves saviors, but you are merely pawns, he murmured, his tone dripping with condescension. God's will can only be met with prayer. Not potions, not prescriptions. A tremor of anger surged within Jacob. Is that all you offer? Words? Empty promises? The air grew thick with the scent of incense and something darker, fear, perhaps. While you pray, the sick suffer. While you preach, children die. Eloan spat on the ground between them, the act both defiant and desperate. And while you cut, they bleed. Just because you play at being a healer doesn't mean you are one. Her voice rose, trembling with the weight of every life she had saved and lost. You're afraid of the unknown, Jacob. But I embrace it. I welcome it. The standoff crackled with raw emotion, a storm brewing at the center of their confrontation. Each heartbeat felt like a countdown to the inevitable explosion. The darkness around them pulsed, alive with unvoiced fears and unanswered prayers, as though the very cosmos were holding its breath, waiting for them all to either rise or fall. Jacob took a breath, the air sharp in his lungs. You talk of embracing the unknown, yet you cling to your herbs like a child to a blanket, he said quietly, his voice low but steady. You fear losing your power as much as I fear losing mine. Power? Eloan hissed. It's not power, it's compassion. It's life, Jacob. You'll never understand that in your world of calculations. But underneath her bravado, Jacob saw the flicker of doubt. He could feel the fragility beneath her bravest words. The memories of patience slipping away, the weight of every decision that had led him to this moment, the anguish of seeing hope extinguished, it all crashed over him like waves on a rocky shore, relentless and unforgiving. There was a silence, sharp and penetrating. It filled the space between them like a chasm, each waiting for the other to take a step, to plunge into the abyss of truth. Then, from the shadows, Father Matthias stepped forward. Enough! You both dance around the truth while those in need lie dying. Perhaps it is not just knowledge or belief that heals, but the union of both. His voice had the gravity of the church itself, but it was laced with a tremor, even he knew the stakes. In that moment of heightened tension, the air, thick with accusation and emotion, felt like it might explode. The lantern flickered one last time, and all three stood, suspended in time, caught in the web of competition, conflict, and the haunting reminder of mortality. Who would rise? Who would fall? Their hearts beat as one, but the shadows whispered of betrayal, of lost souls, and the eerie silence of a world that had forgotten how to give grace. It was a moment that lingered, an echo in the night, as they stood at the precipice of their choices, each heartbeat a reminder that the battle was just beginning, the stakes forever intertwined with the fates of those they sought to heal. In the dim light of a flickering candle, the air thick with the stench of decay and desperation, I see him, a man draped in tattered brown robes, the remnants of a once proud physician. His fingers tremble as they grip a rusty scalpel, an instrument of salvation in a world painted with shadows. The walls of his apothecary are lined with jars, each containing grotesque specimens, remnants of lives lost in the merciless grip of disease. I remember standing there, heart pounding, breath caught in my throat, as he whispered secrets of healing that felt more like prayers than medicine. Bathe in the moonlight, he said, eyes gleaming feverishly with conviction. Let the cosmos wash over you. That is the cure. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. I wanted to run. But there was something in his gaze, a flicker of madness that gripped my soul. It was the end of an era, the twilight of ignorance slipping silently into the night, and I was merely a witness to the chaos that was about to unfold. In the corner, a woman, pale and frail, lay sprawled on a straw mattress, her body racked with fever. Her name was Beatrice, a name that carried with it the weight of 1,000 unfulfilled dreams. I remembered her laughter once, bright and melodic, but now silence reigned, an echo of lost joy. The physician leaned in, breath hitching with desperation. We must draw the blood, he insisted, eyes wild. It is the only way. But I saw the truth in Beatrice's glassy stare. She was not a vessel for his experiments. She was a soul, a heartbeat, a vibrant life extinguished by the folly of a world clinging to ancient beliefs. There was a time before this moment, a time when the air was filled with the sweet scent of blossoms, when knowledge flowed like wine at a banquet. But the medieval grip was suffocating, a chokehold of superstition and fear. They believed, oh how they believed, that the stars dictated their fates. That the alignment of planets could summon illness or deliver salvation. And I was trapped in that world, bound by the chains of ignorance, watching as the plague swept through cities like a relentless spectre. "Have you heard?" whispered a voice behind me. "Here Nicholas, a fellow apprentice," his eyes shining with a fervor I couldn't quite understand. "The scholars in Italy are speaking of something new. The ancients, they say, knew more than we believed. The body is a vessel, not a punishment from God." His words were a spark in the darkness, igniting a fire within me. We need not rely on leeches and incantations. We can dissect, we can study. We can understand. But fear lingers like a shadow. I saw it reflected in the faces of the townsfolk, in their whispered prayers and furtive glances. Change is a beast that roars and bites, and they were not ready to confront the monster. I remember the day we stood before the cathedral, the sun casting long shadows, as people gathered to hear the priest preach against the dark whispers of reason. "The devil roams among us," he thundered, and they clutched their rosaries, eyes wide with terror. "Do not listen to the temptations of man. The cure lies in faith, not in dissection." My heart sank. Faith is no remedy for rot. Beatrice's fever raged on, her skin a canvas of despair. I wanted to shake the physician, to scream that she was not an experiment, that her life was worth more than the sum of her parts. But he was lost in his obsession, in the thrill of discovery, blinded by the promise of a new dawn that was just out of reach. I whispered to Beatrice, "Hold on, please. Just hold on." But the walls of the room closed in, the shadows grew long, and I felt the grip of despair tightening around my chest. As the nights bled into days, the wind shifted. I watched as Nicholas threw himself into the writings of Galen and Hippocrates, his fervor infectious. "What if we could challenge the old ways?" he said, his voice trembling with excitement. "What if we could save lives not through prayers but through understanding?" His eyes danced with a fire that mirrored the candlelight, illuminating our darkened world. But each revelation felt like a dagger aimed at our hearts. What would become of our faith? What would happen to the souls who clung to the old ways like drowning sailors grasping at straws? Then, one fateful night, the fever broke. I remember the moment, the stillness that fell over the room like a shroud. Beatrice stirred, her breath shallow at first, and then she opened her eyes, glassy and unfocused, but alive. The physician stepped back, disbelief etched across his face, the scalpel slipping from his fingers, clattering to the floor. He had fought against the odds, but against what? Against life? Against the very essence of hope? The dawn broke, casting light through the fractured windows, illuminating the darkness that had seeped into our lives. Beatrice smiled, the ghost of her former self flickering to life, and in that moment, I understood, the transition to Renaissance medicine was not merely a shift in practice, it was a confrontation with our deepest fears, our darkest doubts. It was the beginning of a new belief, a leap into the unknown, a world where knowledge and faith could coexist, where science and spirit could dance in a delicate embrace. But as I stood there, heart racing, I felt the weight of the future pressing against my chest, the tension of a world on the brink of transformation. Would it bring salvation or doom? Would we emerge as saviors or sinners, blessed with the power to heal or cursed with the knowledge to destroy? My thoughts spiraled into a void filled with uncertainty, the line between success and failure blurred, and all I could do was cling to the remnants of hope as the shadows danced around me. The Renaissance was waiting, impatient, hungry, and relentless. And beneath it all, I could feel the heartbeat of a new era echoing through the walls, beckoning us forward into the abyss of possibility. The stench was unbearable, a visceral amalgamation of sweat, blood, and fear that hung like a thick fog in the air. I stood in the dimly lit room, the flickering candlelight casting sinister shadows as if the very walls were alive, breathing the desperation of those trapped within. In the corner, a woman writhed on a straw-stuffed mattress, her scream slicing through the oppressive silence, a haunting melody that would linger in my mind long after the night had slid into dawn. Her skin glistened with fever, eyes wide with terror, and in that moment, I felt her raw, unrelenting agony claw at my chest, squeezing the breath from my lungs. "Do something," she gasped, a plea laced with panic, her voice trembling like a fragile leaf in the autumn wind. But I stood frozen, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm in my ears, drowning out the desperation of the scene before me. I was no healer, no savior, I was merely an apprentice, the weight of the world tipping precariously on my shoulders. My mentor, Master Gregory, moved with purpose, his hand steady yet burdened. He was a man molded by years of suffering, a doctor shaped by the very tragedies that haunted this age. His brow furrowed with tension as he prepared his instruments, a grotesque array of tools that gleamed with a sinister promise under the flickering lights. "Leeches," he muttered, as if the word itself held the power to conjure life from the abyss. He tossed a handful of the creatures into a bowl. The blood must flow to rid the sickness. I shuddered, thinking of the horrors that lay ahead. How could these ancient remedies, this primitive understanding of life and death, actually hold any weight against the malice of disease? In the shadows, I could almost hear the whispers of the villagers, "They are but fools, those doctors. Quacks who trade in shadows and dreams." I wanted to scream back at them, to tell them that we, too, were lost in the dark, groping for threads of understanding in a tapestry woven with ignorance. I remember the fading echoes of laughter as the village children played outside, blissfully unaware of the battle raging within those four walls. They believed the stories spun by their elders, that doctors were sorcerers, wielding magic for a price. Oh, how they would have laughed if they knew the truth. Master Gregory's voice broke through my thoughts, heavy with an intensity that echoed through the room. "We are not monsters, but healers caught in the web of our time." The weight of his words settled around us, a shroud of sorrow. "We do what we can with the knowledge bestowed upon us. We do not have the luxury of modern science, only faith and our resolve." But what faith could withstand the onslaught of the Black Death? What resolve could stem the tide of pestilence that swept through our villages like a reaper claiming souls without mercy? I watched as he placed the leeches upon her fevered skin, watched her shudder at their cold embrace. A chill ran down my spine, a reminder of the countless myths that held our world captive, the belief that bloodletting could cure all ills, that the blade was the answer to every ailment, that ignorance was somehow a shield against suffering. In that moment, I could see the truth behind the facade of medieval medicine, the tangled threads of hope and despair that wove through the lives of those who sought our help. It was not magic, but desperation that drove us, the desire to save, to protect, even when the odds were insurmountable. "I remember," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I remember the stories told in candlelit corners, the tales of the so-called doctors who summoned death with their incantations, who carved flesh as if it were clay. But it wasn't like that, not really." My heart raced, caught between the need for truth and the fear of judgment. "We're just people trying to do our best, trapped in a world that doesn't understand." "That's it," Master Gregory replied, his eyes meeting mine, a flicker of empathy breaking through the severity of the moment. "People believe we dance with death, that we welcome pestilence into our homes. But they do not see the sleepless nights, the gnawing doubts that keep us awake, the failures that haunt us like shadows." As the leeches began to work their grim magic, I felt the room shift around me, the weight of countless lives hanging in the balance. It was a harsh reality, one filled with sorrow and relentless determination. I watched as the woman gasped, the blood flowing with each heartbeat, a reminder that healing often felt like bleeding. I remember the cold air of the night creeping through cracks in the walls, whispering secrets of death lurking just beyond our reach. I could almost see it, the specter of disease weaving through the streets, casting a long shadow over our town. It stole lives, stole hope, and here we were, a band of misfits wielding our meager knowledge against an all-consuming dark. And yet, there was a raw beauty in our struggle. I witnessed the fierce love of a mother who dared to bring her child to us, despite the risk of scorn. I felt the admiration of a father who knelt before us, pleading for a miracle. "Help her," he cried, a cacophony of fear and love that echoed in my ears. In those moments, I realized we were not the cruel figures of myth. We were the desperate, the passionate, the flawed. We were the ones who clung to the flickering flame of hope amid the suffocating darkness. Suddenly, the door burst open, and a gust of wind swept through the room, carrying with it the scent of rain and impending storm. Startled, we turned. In the doorway stood a figure cloaked in shadows, a silhouette against the flickering flames. My heart raced as I recognized the familiar shape of a townsman, his face twisted with turmoil. "They say you're killing her," he spat, fury and fear intertwining. "That you're butchers, not healers." In that moment, the weight of it all came crashing down upon me, the myths that soaked into the very bones of our existence, the misconceptions that painted us as villains. I saw it in Master Gregory's eyes, the flicker of doubt, the sting of accusation. "No," he roared, voice trembling with emotion. "We fight for her life, not against it." But his words hung in the air, tangled in the chaos, vibrating with the desperation of our reality. In the swirling shadows, the truth remained elusive, the haunting echo of the past intertwining with the present, and as I stood amidst the tension, I could feel it deep within my soul. We were not just doctors, we were survivors, thrust into a narrative that sought to erase our humanity, yet we pressed on, blooded but unbowed. And as the storm rumbled outside, I knew that the battle was far from over. The world beyond would continue to spin its tales of fear and misunderstanding, but within these walls, we would fight with everything we had. The leeches would work, the blood would flow, and amid that haunting cacophony of life and death, we would stand resolute.